Let's say, for the sake of argument, you're a relatively small game developer from Finland. It's 2001 and you have just dropped a universally praised, award-winning third-person shooter onto the market. Obviously, the question of a sequel isn't so much of an if, but a when. Now, without a doubt, you are rolling in more cash than you've ever laid hands on before, but there's a bit of an issue. The whole small player in a big world act, it only works once. And now that you've shown the industry the level of quality you're capable of, expectations are in the stratosphere. So what do? Well, in this contrived narrative device where you're Remedy Entertainment, you scrounge together every ounce of creative talent you have at your disposal, make a Faustian bargain with the devil, and release one of the very best video games the medium has ever seen before. What's up, guys? I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome back to the Max Payne full series retrospective.
It started with the death of a woman.
Max, we gotta stop meeting like this.
You can't win this one, Max.
So I guess I'd become what they wanted me to be.
You got sloppy, Payne.
It was my fault.
Game over, Max Payne.
Max, dearest of all my friends.
Alright, so just to give you guys an idea of how much of an impact Max Payne made on the video game industry, its official release was July of 2001, and by the time December of that very same year rolled around, Take-Two had already publicly announced that they had acquired the rights to the IP and would be bankrolling a sequel, one that would drop in September of 2003. Now, some of you might be wondering if we skipped a few events on the timeline, because how the hell did this even become an option? But no. Take-Two was knocking down Remedy's proverbial door for a deal almost from day one of Max Payne's launch. It was fairly obvious to anyone with eyes that these guys were going somewhere, and Take-Two/Rockstar took full advantage of their role in porting Max Payne to consoles by getting to the small finish upstarts first. And the deal that they marched in with was honestly pretty insane. Essentially, they were willing to throw an ungodly amount of money at the development of a new Max Payne title, but in return, Remedy would wrap up the franchise in a nice little bow and give it to Rockstar as a sacrificial offering of sorts. But really, that's just the what of this situation. I think it's the why that most people seem to have trouble understanding. See, from our perspective as fans, this was a newly proven developer just kind of giving up creative rights to the franchise that brought them into the fold. And really, depending on your perspective, it might have even resembled a big company stepping in and bullying a smaller one into obedience. But when you stop for a second and look at things from Remedy's point of view, the reasons for accepting this deal, they do seem pretty attractive. Max Payne had eaten up almost 6 years of these guys' lives, and as we would come to find, this was a team made up of some amazingly creative people. The urge to move on to something new and novel, it must have been enticing to say the least. But the deal that Rockstar had slammed down on the table, regardless of what perspective you view it from, was tough to deny. Because not only would they be getting $10 million for the IP rights to Max Payne, but on top of stock options, they would also receive roughly double Part 1's development budget to work on the sequel. And as if that wasn't already the absolute definition of a sweetheart deal, Rockstar wasn't even looking to have any creative control over the project. In what I would call an uncharacteristically smart business move for a game industry giant, these guys understood that what made Max Payne such a massive hit was the specific team and circumstances surrounding its development. I mean, no matter how much money you throw at a project, there's just no way to artificially replicate the kind of drive, hunger, and passion that you would get out of a young and determined studio like Remedy.
He's not responding! This guy is a train wreck! We're losing him!
When you compare it to competing AAA titles, development for Max Payne 2 was a fairly speedy affair since these guys had already built a solid platform to work from. Characters, a narrative world, gameplay foundation, and general theming was already well established, meaning the bulk of what they would be doing on this new project would be tweaking, adding to, or improving something that, at least in some part, already existed. And while that may not have paid off, at least monetarily speaking, I can confirm that the hard and earnest love these guys had for this world and its characters, it shines through every single microsecond of Max Payne 2's runtime.
I am afraid, but I start again from the beginning. Trace my own steps to the scene of the crime.
We might be able to argue about how universal the praise for Max Payne was. I mean, I'm sure there were scattered PC and console gamers who didn't find it to be very fun or were thrown off by its flaws. But if there's one concrete, objective fact in all of this, it's that the gameplay Max Payne introduced was something altogether new and exciting. Coming from the perspective of someone who was very much plugged into the gaming scene back then, I would say it was almost like the industry had just been sitting there waiting for something to come around and rock its world like this. In bullet time, Bullet hit it with the force of a nuclear bomb. Of course, it does need to be said that slow motion had been thrown into video games before Remedy took their shot at it. But I don't think anybody would push back on the idea that Max Payne was the title that finally got the formula right, which was a monumental achievement. But here's the question: how in the hell do you follow that up?
I can't read.
Just say the line number one said.
You think I was listening?
As it turns out, that's a little easier than you might assume, because despite the first Max Payne's overwhelming popularity, it's not like it was particularly hard to wring any criticism out of its fans. There were most definitely issues that needed a bit of attention, rough spots that could use another pass of tuning, and slight abrasions just begging for an equally minuscule tweak. Which brings us to what I would call the implied thesis statement of Max Payne 2's development. It is much easier to improve something that already exists than it is to create something that doesn't. Remedy had already invented and shaped an incredible system with its first AAA product, but more importantly, they were smart enough to know that any changes at the foundation level were likely to bring the entire house of cards tumbling down. Call it the result of efficiency, a strict deadline, or just garden variety pride in their previous work, but the lion's share of their developmental efforts in Max Payne 2 went into refining the innovative but relatively loose set of mechanics they had introduced in its predecessor. And that can be a divisive subject, because when you watch as many YouTube video game reviews as I do, you'll see that the concept of sequels can very often lead in the direction of fashioning something new out of something old. Of course, I have no way of putting a solid number on this, but it's my impression that most people look down on the idea of a game's follow-up not doing enough to separate itself from what came before. And while I don't agree with that idea specifically, I can at least admit there is an argument there. Or I guess maybe I should say that I can understand why a person would be looking for something new in a sequel. But from my perspective, when I find a gameplay style and a narrative world that I enjoy, my first thought isn't, oh hell yeah, I can't wait till the developers change this into something else altogether.
See? I couldn't break it even if I tried, see? Oh! Shit! Damn it! You okay down there? You okay?
Depending on which side of that subject you end up coming down on, this may be the best or worst news you've heard all day, but Remedy's second shot at this franchise, outside of a very limited and specific list of outliers, it doesn't really add anything new to the Max Payne formula. Like I said before, there are tons of adjustments, improvements, and modifications, but really, almost no brand new inclusions, which may not be the right move for every project or every developer, but I feel like in this specific situation, it was the only way to go. And having said that, it is kind of fitting we're going to head into the game's general movement next, because it's going to feel incredibly similar, if not outright the same as it did in the first game. Max responds to your inputs pretty fast, and the animation of him changing direction seems to be the only thing keeping it from feeling totally one-to-one. Our guy still has a truckload of bounce in his stride, which I don't know about you, but always struck me as funny. Like, not only is this fool about to drop Armageddon down on the heads of anybody who wronged him, but he's gonna do it wearing a pair of these. Outside of that though, even playing the two games directly back to back, I really couldn't tell you if one is more smooth or responsive than the other. Which, if anything, means Remedy kind of successfully nailed one of the most important aspects of a third-person shooter on their first attempt at it. Working our way up the list of mechanics, ascending in complexity, the multi-directional dodge roll is back, and it operates almost exactly like it did in Part 1. The key word there being almost. The big difference is that you don't have to wait quite so long for the animation to finish before you can start shooting. In fact, that's kind of the major source of most of the improvements you'll find here in Max Payne 2. Any of the animations or movements that got in between the player and shooting at bad guys have either been severely lessened or altogether gotten rid of. For example, Part 1 wouldn't allow you to shoot while in the air, whether it be from a normal jump or when falling from somewhere up high. Something that is no longer an issue here in the follow-up. Now, I won't lie to you, this doesn't exactly offer up some substantial new gameplay strategy. I mean, if you force me to, I might be able to think of, I don't know, like 2 or 3 examples of actually needing to take advantage of this improvement. But what it does do, along with all the other small tweaks made to animations, is iron out the bumpy parts that used to roughen up combat just a bit. It does slightly up the skill ceiling and add to the moveset a tiny amount, but mostly it just improves the overall smoothness of the areas where differing parts of combat and movement intersect with each other. Honestly, looking back at the footage I captured, I might be underselling things here a bit, because while I didn't find myself taking much advantage of the new airborne firing ability, it is kind of hard to deny how much it opens up the moveset to account for more potential combat scenarios. I mean, dodge rolling backwards off an overhang to drop a little death from above onto a few cleaners it's a tough experience to fault. What really kills me though, now that I have this ability, is wondering why it wasn't available for this specific part of Max Payne 1. Having played Part 2, it's really hard to go back to this skylight without wondering what could have been. Getting back to business though, both your normal bullet time activation and shot dodge work nearly the same as it used to, but with a few proportionally small improvements that make a disproportionately big impact on their usability. Starting off with bullet time, you're still going to have to build up meter by taking out goons, and it provides roughly the same slow motion functionality as it used to. Only now, successive kills while in bullet time will cause the world to run progressively slower. The cool part being, this doesn't affect the speed at which you can move or aim your weapons. So in the right scenario, you can run through an entire room chaining together kills till time is barely even passing, and then deactivate bullet time and watch all of the bodies you've just sent into orbit come crashing down to the earth around you. It is genuinely, and I couldn't be more serious, a thing of beauty. Now obviously, you're not going to hear me undercut the importance of a rule of cool approach, especially in a third-person shooter like this. But on a more mechanical layer, this new bullet time functionality helps fix a potential issue from Max Payne 1. In that game, it was kinda hard to tell when an enemy was actually down for the count because it could take so long for their death animation to kick in while using bullet time. But here in the sequel, you've got both an auditory and interactive sense of feedback when someone meets their end. Because once that last hit is struck, you can actually hear things slow down further, especially if you're still firing, but on top of that, you can feel the change in how slow things are moving around you. Honestly, it's a pretty genius bit of diegetic confirmation that lets you play the game at least relatively extemporaneously. What little portion of gray matter used to be dedicated to listening for a single instance of feedback to let you know when to change targets in Max Payne 1 can now be reallocated towards pulling off awesome-looking action movie stunts. If you've been paying attention to the footage so far, you might have already noticed this, but instead of wasting time reloading in ultra slow motion, now Max will do this very ridiculous but nevertheless cool looking spin move. And you know, in a game that was already very much inspired by John Woo films, this is an especially John Woo worthy action to have take place. In Max Payne 1, when you ran dry on ammo, a quick shot dodge could be performed, which would automatically fill up whatever weapon you were firing at the time. And even though this was something that ended up getting adjusted here in Part 2, it's not like it was necessarily a flaw. Instead, it sort of felt like a combo ender from the Killer Instinct series. Even with a full bar of slow motion juice, the gun you had equipped would act like a limiter for how long you could effectively stay in bullet time, and the shot dodge was a cool way to slightly extend that time. With this new spinning reload though, you could stay in bullet time longer, which complements the degrees of slow motion you can activate by chaining together kills. In the fall of Max Payne, being able to reload in a nearly seamless way, it adds a smoothness to the bullet time, and it's got a perk that's kind of easy to miss. During the spin, your movement speed is increased just a bit, so in the same way a shot dodge helped skilled players squeeze a little more tech out of Part 1, someone looking for a little more mechanical functionality past the surface level could manually reload before running out of ammo and use the spin to augment their movement to string together kills better. Sort of like a dash that could be performed to get you to your next target. And I'm really stoked to say that the tiny tweaks leading to major usability gains type of development style Remedy used here, it doesn't stop with just the reloads, because the shot dodges have also seen a nice, deceptively large round of improvements.
Sucker!
On a more surface level, these horizontal slow-mo dives have had their height and airtime increased to a point that, in my opinion, makes them feel significantly more satisfying to use. To be honest with you, I think this one tweak is so impactful that it does make it a little hard to go back to the first game after you played this one for a while. It may not sound like it would be all that important, but just a few more microseconds of time spent gliding through the air can be the difference between taking down 2 hitmen and 3 or 4. And it also gives you a good amount of wiggle room so you can pick your shots a little more carefully. I mean, it's not like ammo is in short supply throughout a normal difficulty run of the game or anything, so it's not about conserving resources, but it just feels really cool to deliver 1 or 2 well-aimed hits to the chest and head versus half a magazine dumped into whatever your cursor happens to fall on. And all of that does make a huge impact on Max Payne 2's combat, but really it's not even the most important improvement this mechanic has seen in its evolved state. If you watched my last entry in this franchise retrospective or just played the game yourself, you'll know that Max Payne 1's shot dodge has a singular, fatal flaw. After Max's Hawaiian shirt finally made contact with the ground, the amount of time spent getting him back up and on his feet was fairly substantial. So if your shot dodge didn't have a 100% kill ratio, whoever was left standing in the room would have ample time to just light your ass up, as the standing animation prevented you from moving or shooting back. And I'd be willing to bet the improvement here isn't going to come in the form you'd be expecting, because Max seems to take nearly just as much time getting his pill-addicted frame up from the floor as he used to. Instead of tweaking that specific aspect to the move, Remedy decided to give us an option to keep Max there on the ground as long as he's still firing his guns. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say this was one of the best moves they made when developing this video game. Like I already talked about in the preceding video, it's important to temper the almost godlike abilities Max has in these games with equal but opposite balances, so you're not just spending the entire time plowing through every threat the game throws at you with ease. In my eyes, punishing a poorly timed or executed shot dodge counterintuitively is sort of vital for the player to continue having fun. And now that we have this ability to keep Max grounded, the mechanic feels more fleshed out and polished without taking away the features that made sure it didn't become an instant win the fight button. Now, this might make it sound like I'm contradicting myself. I mean, I did just say that the limitations of the shot dodge were important for its function, but this new inclusion has its own built-in difficulty counterweights. Like I already said, you can only stay down for as long as you're still shooting, and taking into account how much of your magazine you may have already emptied into the people, furniture, and drywall around you, you might not have enough to deal with every threat that managed to escape your slow-motion killing spree. So even with this improved functionality, you might still find yourself facing a firing squad while you hop back up from whatever yoga position you managed to get yourself into on the ground. Keeping with the theme of shooting, in Max Payne 1, I complained that the bullets seemed to take a flabbergasting amount of time to reach their targets, making your ability to hit moving opponents more than a little compromised. And good news, lead-based projectiles now smash into whatever's in front of them at near instantaneous speeds, so you won't have to lead your targets like some kind of jet pilot anymore. I also noticed and was really happy to see a more forgiving amount of accuracy per weapon. Max definitely won't be winning any long-range pistol shooting competitions, but the grouping of your shots in Part 2 is definitely much less unpredictable. So far, if you haven't noticed yet, there's been a general theme of Max Payne 2 taking mechanics and systems that were introduced in its predecessor and improving on them in wildly tangible, yet seemingly slight ways, which should be the general message you come away from this gameplay section with. Now, if you are inclined to live life as a glass half empty kind of person, you might see this as an obvious result of Part 2's significantly shorter development time compared to the first entry. And to be fair to that argument, it's not like I can provably deny it as a factor. I mean, when you've got less time to pop out a sequel, it does make sense to spend most of it fine-tuning stuff that already exists. But if you find yourself in more of an optimistic mindset, you might assume this is a really good example of a group of people who have a real sense of love and respect for the property they were working on. I mean, maybe they're making sure that the title to follow up the illustrious Max Payne would do its best to stick to the formula that made that game so great, only tweaked just a bit to work better than before. In a way, this is Schrodinger's game dev project, because both of these opinions very well could be true simultaneously. I mean, it's not like one negates the other. Regardless of your point of view on the subject, though, I think the result is a game that does an incredible job balancing the sometimes opposing ideas of iteration and evolution. Because it definitely is good to make sure you're not serving up the same exact experience every single time you release an entry in a franchise. But at the same time, you're going to want to make sure your game sticks within the established identity that drew so many to it as a property in the first place. Max Payne 2, in my opinion, is an advanced lesson in this balancing act. A perfect example of keeping the needle right in the middle without either side suffering from a lack of attention. All of that being said, though, there are a few brand new elements here in Part 2 that don't fall into that fixing a previous mechanic category. And the first thing that comes to my mind on that front is a really solid increase in gameplay and set-piece variety.
I had a permanent, constipated grimace on my
No
face.
offense.
I was revenge, Mr. Genocide.
Before we get too deep into this subject, though, I want to make it clear that at no point during my many playthroughs of Max Payne 1 did I ever think it was screaming for more options than shooting differing shades of mafia stereotype. Which is to say, if you strapped me to a chair and forced me to be overly critical of the game, a lack of variety wouldn't even crack the top 10 of my complaints. However, I can see why Remedy might think they had a sort of creative responsibility to not just deliver the same exact gameplay experience 2 times in a row. And in that spirit, you're going to find a nice spread of new gameplay scenarios to tackle this time around. Starting from the top, at Max's apartment, you've got a group of fellow tenants that you can team up with for some extra firepower.
I'm Violet.
Violet, baby. I'm your man.
In your dreams, Juicehead.
There's really no penalty for allowing any of them to die or doing the job yourself, but if you are able to keep them alive, they'll offer support from the window when you get swarmed on the ground floor. After that, you have an entire level where Mona's giving you verbal directions to navigate a fancy high-rise complex. Then there are a few sequences that have no combat at all. One taking place inside of Max's police precinct, and the other in an abandoned funhouse dedicated to an in-universe psychological thriller called Address Unknown. And in an action-packed shooting game, you might figure spots like this would throw the whole machine out of whack, but as far as I'm concerned, it's quite the opposite. Where most of this game and its predecessor have you moving through locations at the speed of light, trying to outthink and outmaneuver the city's fine criminal American population, these levels give you a chance to slow down and really take in your surroundings. I think Remedy understood this purpose really well because they made sure every inch of these combatless areas contained the maximum amount of world building humanly imaginable.
We found you out of it on V, covered in blood, burying the pieces of your wife and the pizza guy under a rose bush in the backyard. There's a bloody chainsaw in the bathtub, and by the looks of it, they had been shot in your bed. The murder weapons have your prints all over them, and you say you didn't do it.
Hell no! I'm a fall guy! I've been framed! It's a setup!
Further into the game, at the cleaner's warehouse, you'll get to take control of Mona, which is cool in and of itself. But towards the end of her section, you'll be sniping bad guys from above, trying to keep Max alive as he tries to escape the construction site. A fun little tidbit about this level is that a portion of both campaigns overlap with each other, so you'll get to see events and conversations play out from both characters' perspectives, which is honestly really cool.
Mona, these guys are packing. Close to overkill. Hardcore professionals.
Whoa!
Doesn't seem that way from where I'm standing.
Shake it, baby, shake it!
One look at the boss, and bam! The Ice Queen goes like this.
After that, you'll have to work your way through an incredibly effective set piece where you wake up in the hospital sans Arsenal, trying to either stay away from or roll through the assassins sent to make sure you don't get discharged with a clean bill of health. Then there's a portion in the final stretch of the game where you have to keep a panicked Vinnie Gognitti in a booby-trapped Captain Baseball Bat Boy costume from exploding. Although the cutscene you get when he does explode is kind of worth letting it happen at least once. Like I already said, I wasn't exactly left wanting with Part 1's conveyor belt of multi-goon shootouts, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the huge upgrade we got here in the sequel. Just about the only downside, in my opinion, that comes with this new focus on variety is that it can sort of get in the way of someone looking to replay the game. I mean, coming from personal experience, on a first run, it does its job incredibly well, but someone looking to hop back into Max Payne 2 for a second or a 30th time is going to have to jump through a few non-shooting based hoops in between gunfights, which, depending on what you enjoy, could stand between you and the parts of the game that prove to be the most fun.
So my boyfriend, the loser jerk, sits on his ass all day and keeps playing these stupid video games.
This next point, though, is actually a really good combination of fixing an issue from the first game and adding a new addition to the gameplay. Once again, heading back to the well that is my last video on Max Payne, I mentioned what I called the grenade around the corner problem, which was a catch-all term used to describe how unfair the game felt with a near constant assault of damage-dealing traps set around more than half of the blind corners you would come to. Whether it was grenades being lobbed at you in scenarios that only a previous playthrough could prepare you for, or cheap enemy placement and spawns, Max Payne 1 could often feel more like a test meant to confirm the durability of your keyboard and surrounding drywall than a video game. Something that, for the large majority of the time, you're not going to have to worry about in its sequel. It's nearly impossible to overstate just how much more balanced and fair this game feels compared to the one that came before it, but you shouldn't take that for a lack of challenge. I would assume even on its lowest difficulty, Max Payne 2 is going to send you to the game over screen a staggering amount of times. Like truly, a baffling number of deaths. Which might have you wondering just what the hell the difference is. And I think the answer to that question is in the circumstances surrounding those fail states. In Max Payne 2, every single time I died, it felt like it was the result of me doing something wrong. Sometimes, maybe I wouldn't notice a new bad guy entering the room from some unchecked doorway, or maybe I performed a shot dodge at just the right time that I essentially locked myself into having absolutely no choice but to watch Max fly slowly through the air into a freshly thrown grenade, or more often than not, off of some catwalk and to his death. Regardless of the circumstance, though, most of those times, it was a scenario that I most definitely had some level of control over. Where the first game may have required the use of precognition to survive, its sequel sits in a middle ground. You are going to be hit with seemingly unbeatable odds, but you always get the feeling that with the right degree of timing and skill, you could have avoided a death. It's actually sort of hard to convey with words, but at the simplest level, it just doesn't feel like Max Payne 2 was designed with the specific intent of killing the player. I mean, it's definitely still going to do that, but with a higher level of player control and less cheaply designed gameplay elements, you can experience roughly the same situation, but instead of reloading a previous save out of sheer spite and animosity directed at whatever asshole thought this elevator should lure you in with painkillers only to drop 2 grenades on your head, you're doing it because you failed to react to something that you at least have the feeling you could have reacted to. It's a slight difference, to be sure, and even though the end result may be roughly the same, how you feel about it can be wildly different. Or at least that's my read on it.
Oh, no, you won't. Get out! Get out!
Now, even if I hadn't already mentioned it before, I think just about anybody giving this game even a passing glance could tell its developers were inspired by the Hong Kong action flicks of one Jonathan Wu. I mean, the whole diving through the air, guns akimbo as your bullets pepper the environment, your enemies, and really anything with the absolute balls to be within a square mile of you thing, a dead giveaway that the staff at Remedy had seen more than their fair share of A Better Tomorrow. And you could definitely argue they got damn close to that benchmark with the release of the first Max Payne. So with the new entry in the series comes the obvious goal of closing that gap even further. Enter Havoc, a standalone physics engine that gives the objects and, more importantly, the bodies in Max Payne 2 a life of their own. And in my opinion, the single addition that elevates the overall shooting in Part 2 to an entirely different level than what came before it. Now, the first and most obvious application of a bespoke real-time physics system like this is to allow objects in the environment to be realistically affected by things like collision, gunshots, and explosions. Really nailing that John Woo firefight experience with pieces of glass, furniture, and random assorted detritus getting knocked around in slow motion as you discharge your guns with reckless abandon. And as you can see, it's really effective in that sense. I mean, it's not like physics objects are used in any sort of tangible gameplay sense, but it's really hard to deny the added cool factor of having planks of wood and empty paint buckets flying in the air as you go about the process of running through the environment like a drunk tornado with a badge. One of the best things in the world is imagining Remedy as a little kid excited to show you their new toy, because this game doesn't even wait a full 15 minutes before throwing this new feature directly in your face. And like, sure, there's nothing forcing you to shoot this conspicuously placed barrel with a piece of wood sitting on it. However, I'd be willing to bet a not insubstantial amount of money that 99% of players took a shot at this thing as soon as they saw it. That being said, when Max Payne fans remember their first time with Part 2, I imagine it's not going to be the in-game objects they remember flying around the environment. It's the people. And in honor of quite possibly the greatest thing that video games have ever given us as a species, please enjoy a little piece I like to call Gravity, an ode to ragdoll physics. Look, there's some stuff I'm willing to budge on. Issues or beliefs that I'd be willing to debate or discuss with the honest intention of potentially having my mind changed. But when it comes to early 2000s ragdoll physics, there is not a single motherfucker on this earth that could convince me they weren't the coolest thing mankind has ever brought into existence. Do we still have body physics today? Sure, but there isn't a doubt in my mind that the best era of the tech is well behind us. It was a beautiful moment in time, and I'm just genuinely happy I was there to experience it firsthand. And like I said leading into this subject, this tiny inclusion upgrades would have already been an amazingly fun video game by orders of magnitude. Outside of hyperbole, I truly cannot begin to explain to you how much joy I get from watching these greaseballs slip the bounds of gravity and enjoy their new lives as celestial bodies. And I'll tell you one thing, Remedy knew exactly how fun of a system they were sitting on, because at fairly regular intervals you'll come across what I can only describe as ragdoll physics honeypots, a scenario that has zero reason to exist outside of serving as a playground for the game's new tech. To put things more specifically, these are small exhibitions where enemies, objects, and other interactable elements are placed in just the perfect way to entice multiple shots at enacting the most chaotic and funny situations humanly imaginable. I mentioned in my last video how Max Payne 1 was responsible for this really interesting phenomenon where players would all collectively participate in the same seemingly unintentional strategy, constantly quick-saving not because it was necessary but as a means to challenge themselves, attempting to complete sections of a level more skillfully or in increasingly flashy ways. Well, here in the sequel, it seems like Remedy really leaned into this gameplay style, especially when you take into account just how tempting it can be to park Max near one of the aforementioned ragdoll exhibitions and retry them with differing combinations of guns and actions, looking for the most satisfying result. But even in the course of regular progression through an area, I found myself pulling the whole "let's reload that sequence and see if I can clear it more stylishly" strat more often than I did in part 1. And honestly, I think it's the ragdoll and normal object physics that makes it so much more tempting. Like I've been ranting and hinting at, I think this one addition might be the most valuable thing Remedy added to this sequel. Because if you can't enjoy launching a person into low orbit with a torrent of gunfire or witnessing an explosion send the lifeless body of an enemy cartwheeling through the air, I don't think you're capable of human emotion. And for sure, a majority of what makes me appreciate Max Payne 2 is the sheer fun of sending people barreling through the atmosphere, but there's some mechanical worth to go over here as well. For example, you can use doors, objects, and even your own body to knock people to the ground, so if you're smart and in just the right situation, it's not hard to make things a little easier for yourself and nab a quick, relatively consequence-free kill.
No! What is this?
Okay, nice timing.
Shoot up! Run!
And since the two are almost joined at the hip in terms of importance, we also have to talk about the addition of explosive hazards. Boxes of ammo, gas cans, red barrels, the typical video game rogues gallery of objects meant to blow up with varying levels of intensity. Just like the ability to shoot while jumping, this is a system that doesn't exactly demand the player make use of it, but for those that do, there's an added layer of gameplay variety. You can 100% keep an eye out for these volatile items and turn what could have been a challenging encounter into an impromptu fireworks show. Or you could do what I do and stumble on the benefits of these things by accidentally setting them off in a firefight and pretending it was totally on purpose, oftentimes causing more damage to me than the people I'm trying to kill. To be honest with you, I never really considered these explosive stage props as anything special because they slot so well into the gameplay flow of Max Payne 2 that they almost disappear. But after playing this and starting up Max Payne 1, you can really feel how much of an impact it makes having so few of these options to mess around with. What I'm trying to say is explosives are a lot like oxygen, an incredibly important component that you really only notice when it's gone. Alright, so I may have gotten a little deep into the weeds here with all the specifics, but the intended message is that Max Payne 2 is Max Payne 1, but with all of the dials cranked way higher. Every mechanic, system, and element that could be found in the first entry is going to show up here in its sequel, only polished to a level that makes it, honestly, kind of hard to go back to part 1. So you can essentially take every gameplay-related complaint I had in my previous video in the series and draw a big fat X over each one because Max Payne 2 has essentially fixed them all. In my opinion, what we're looking at here is what I would consider to be the definitive archetype for a sequel. Instead of trimming away anything that might not have been perfect in the original, they just perfected it. I mean, I can almost envision a mantra posted every few inches at Remedy HQ reading, add more, take away nothing, improve everything. Without a doubt in my mind, I can say that Max Payne 2 is the absolute best example we have ever seen of successfully following up a video game release. It's incredibly fun, mechanically challenging, and offers up exactly what somebody who had just finished its predecessor would be looking for. In short, it's perfect. When starting up Max Payne 2, we're given an option to review the previous game's events, but since I'm assuming every human on planet Earth has already seen my groundbreaking video on said game, we'll skip over that and get straight to the meat of things. But before that, it's important to keep in mind the kind of structure this game is operating under. At the start, we witness a fraction of the game's ending, which is happening right now. Not like now, but the present in terms of the game's timeline, making everything from here on out a retelling of past events. And honestly, things could be worse in Max Payne terms. I mean, at least he's found himself a nice girl. Before we get to expand on all of that, though, we're thrust one step down on the narrative ladder at the tail end of the story's second act. With Max resembling a freshly tenderized slab of beef, this second look into events to come does a really great job of getting the player hyped on figuring out what the hell could have happened for Max to be in this kind of scenario. There's a lot of vague language referring to something our guy has done but isn't very proud of, and flashbacks to events we haven't witnessed yet. One of them featuring Mona Sachs from the first game, and she seems to be doing pretty okay for a woman who took a bullet to the dome the last time we saw her. Proceeding through the hospital, Max stumbles onto a dead blue-collar worker in much the same way he did that fateful night at Roscoe Street Station. And keeping with the same theme, he's once again set upon by a guy looking to snuff him out. At this point, any player even remotely familiar with Max as a character will be thinking a hearty, good luck with that.
You're a fucking idiot.
During the sequence that follows, Max spends a lot of time drifting in and out of hallucinatory states where he's confronted by a character who he knows but we have yet to meet. On the ground level, Max runs into Jim Bravura, the guy who spent the entire last game chasing him down. I wouldn't get too attached to him though. Just barely escaping a fireball, he ends up in the morgue where we get a name for our mystery lady. Turns out this was Detective Winterson, and by his own admission, Max is the one who killed her. But before we get a chance to inventory the fairly stacked list of things we've witnessed, the game goes another layer down to introduce the inciting incident that put Max on this path in the first place. Don't go getting all gun-ho about jumping headfirst down that rabbit hole though. First, we have to at least address the elephant in the room.
Stay sharp. We're going in. Go, go, go!
In the first game, a mix of budgetary restraints and creative thinking had lead writer Sam Lake stepping into the leather coat of the titular main character. And without a doubt, his smirking, scrunched up mug made for an awesome stopgap solution. Sure, it seemed like most people on planet Earth had something funny to say about it, but it was one of those laughing with you and not at you type of situations. Because if Sam Lake's face on Max Payne was a joke, it was one we were all very happy to be in on. But understandably, once Remedy was able to secure a few multiples of the first game's development budget, the natural direction of progress had them embracing the advances in 3D graphics that were well outside their grasp only a few years and a couple of $1 million ago. And instead of leaving this aspect of development to chance, they hired models for both the 3D and 2D arms of the game's presentation. Now, it's important to declare my bias here and now. I am a Max Payne 2 head down to my core. If you cut me, I bleed this game. So it's probably not going to shock anyone that I prefer the Timothy Gibbs version of our drug-addicted detective. What really surprises me, though, is the fact that this move is still seen as a controversial one today. Like, I guess in a way I sort of understand. I mean, if you grew up with this looker smirking at you, you might naturally form some kind of an attachment. But as a guy who went from this to this, best believe I can appreciate a glow up. On a real note though, I really have always resonated with this version of Max Payne. Maybe it's because this face matches James McCaffrey's voiceover a lot better than Sam Lake's face did, or maybe it's because this dude's chin is sharp enough to cut through other, lesser chins. Either way, when I think of this character, I see this face in my head.
Do I get my phone call?
Max's opening monologue here at the actual inception point of the story's events bridges the gap between the ending of his last tragedy-driven adventure and the start of this new one. It turns out Alfred Woden is actually a man of principle and lived up to his end of the bargain. Max got rid of Nicole Horn, so he made sure to pull all the right strings that would keep Max from seeing the inside of a prison cell for the rest of his life. Disillusioned with the DEA, Payne jumped back over to the NYPD as a homicide detective. I guess he did have enough expertise in that field by now, so that makes sense. Sometime after that job change, Max is on duty when he overhears reports of shots being fired at a warehouse, something that would normally be below the pay grade of a murder cop, but these are extenuating circumstances as the place belongs to Vladimir Lem, our charming Russian buddy from the first game. Max, not being much for the stealth approach, charges right in and comes across a cleaner who sounds comically ominous, leading the way to the gun factory upstairs.
Sure, officer, if that's what you want.
I think 99.9% of first-time players wasted this guy right off the bat, but for the purposes of good storytelling, I let Max find out the hard way that these cleaners are doing a little more than cut-rate tidying up.
Oh, detective, I've got something for you.
Alright, so we know that Vladimir has armed hitmen swarming one of his warehouses. It's time to find out why. Which brings us to Annie and the reason Max probably should be barred from coming within a square mile of any living woman.
Finish her!
Oh, God, no!
Like all the bad things in my life, it started with the death of a woman.
Before her death, though, the gunsmith let us in on a few clues that'll be valuable moving forward. She mentions getting attacked by the mob and that the people here right now actually helped fend them off. So the rules of engagement are about as blurry as they've ever been in Max's version of the Big Apple. And honestly, a clear-headed Detective Payne probably would have been able to avoid a few future issues by connecting some very important dots right here on the spot. But in his defense, he is about to have a close encounter with a leather-clad ghost wielding a Desert Eagle.
Hey!
Yeah, so Mona Sachs is clearly back in the contract killing game and by the looks of it, doing a real bang-up job. In pursuit of some fleeing cleaners, Max is almost flattened by one of their vans when he's saved by Winterson, who looks much better when she's not laid out on an autopsy slab. Now, I've got two things here. A, I know we have to get across that Detective Winterson is Max's partner, but the forced-sounding, "Hey, we're working together on this" line always bothered me. I mean, Max responded to this call fresh off the wire, so it's not like the two were working a case that led them to this place. But more importantly, these two cops just shooting at the wall has always been incredibly funny to me. And it's not a problem with forcing the game into widescreen either, because I can personally confirm this same thing happened in 4x3 back when the game launched. Back at the station, Bravura chews Max out for getting sloppy, despite him doing, in my opinion, fairly okay for a 1 versus 40 gunfight. As he recounts the situation though, Payne leaves out the fact that the once dead hit woman from his days as a UC has shown back up on the radar. With this whole thing reeking of chaos, the chief dumps it on Max's lap while getting Winterson a homicide case a little higher up on the list of priorities, which shows us two things right off the bat. Maybe Bravura might still be a little salty about Payne leading him around New York City like a chump in part 1, and that Winterson is a more accomplished cop than her partner. It turns out these two cases have a connecting thread though. One of the eyewitnesses of Winterson's murder places Mona Sachs at the scene of the crime. Now, before he saw that perp sketch, Max probably could have justified keeping a seemingly unrelated actor out of his report. Him getting a look at this drawing, though, it changes the entire situation, leaving Max to rationalize the fact that he's actively covering for her. Now, you, me, and Max are gonna have to come to terms with that at some point, but first things first, we gotta figure out this whole cleaner situation. And since he'd have to wait another 18 or so years before people would start posting their felonies on TikTok, the only option left is to do some good old-fashioned police work. Which in this scenario means taking a trip to see his Russian mob boss of a friend and figuring out why his property and employee were caught up in this whole murder business. So Max heads over to a familiar spot for fans of the first game, the nightclub Ragnarok, now under Vlad's ownership and in the process of being transitioned into a fancy restaurant called Vodka. At the moment though, the only thing on the menu is lead, as the mobster you just love to hate, Vinny Gognitti, is in the middle of waging a war, presumably fueled by a hatred of the concept of fine dining. So Max takes the rear entrance,
phrasing?
and works his way through Vinny's army of wise guys, fighting off one criminal acquaintance to save another. The journey through the skeleton of the first game's gothic-themed nightclub is laced with nostalgia as you pass by familiar sections and see the facade of Ragnarok lying disassembled on the ground. In fact, if you were paying attention during the intro sequence, you might have noticed Vlad was storing some parts of the old club at Annie's workshop, which to me feels like a bit of commentary on Remedy's part. Like, no matter how different things may seem for Max at the moment, his new job and his second lease on life are just built on top of a foundation of his previous failures, cementing the events of the first game as the beginning of a never-ending loop that Max will likely never find his way out of. Well, either that or I'm just looking way too far into a nice bit of fan service. As our depressed Leo breaches further into the war zone Vodka has become, he comes across Vlad's office and can listen in on the Russian Casanova reassuring one of his girlfriends that he'd be okay now that the cavalry had arrived.
Nothing to worry about, baby. I'm going to be all right. When haven't I been all right?
And with Max's proven record of being able to put holes in mobster wise guys, his calm demeanor is, it's fairly rational. Understandably, Gognitti books it the second Max shows his face, memories of their last encounter no doubt fresh in his mind.
Yeah! Oh my god! Oh god, you shot me! Ah!
And once the mob forces take off, Max and Vlad are able to talk business. Even with the power vacuum left by Max's previous mafia culling, a low-ranked peon like Gognitti probably wouldn't have the backing to be making moves this bold. So Vlad reasons that he must have made some kind of a deal with an organization even higher up on the criminal totem pole than the mafia, because at the moment, he's on a scorched earth campaign wiping out any potential competition. I've always really liked this conversation because it's able to convey a lot of unspoken context. Specifically, it shows that Max and Vlad's collaboration in the previous game has led to something of a friendship between the two. One that's apparently fruitful enough that Max is willing to turn a blind eye to Vlad's continuing criminal ventures.
What was it you did for a living again?
Scout's honor, detective. I have mended my ways, evolved to a higher level.
It makes for enough of an emotional smokescreen that Max's usually sharp detective instincts remain held at bay, which is a returning bad habit of his. Leaving Vodka and heading back to his apartment, Max examines the feeling that a storm is on the horizon. Because with this many faces from his past forcing their way into his life again, it's a little hard to not just barely start making out the curve of time's often cyclical nature. Back at his apartment, Max slips into the kind of nightmare you might expect would plague someone who had been through what this guy has. producing a surreal mirror image of the real world that basically acts as a canvas for Max's mind to sort through the complex emotions stirred up by Mona's return. At the same time, he's relieved to find out she's alive, but is equally guilt-stricken for keeping this from his partner. That guilt no doubt multiplied by him feeling any complex emotions for a woman other than his dead wife. Woken out of his nightmare by a knock at the door, Max finds himself face to face with the ghost in question, and she's not here to deliver any good news.
You are in danger. Both of us are. There's a contract out on us.
Normally, this would be the most attention-worthy subject in any conversation, but at the same time, Max notices a sniper perched in an adjacent apartment window. And when the shooting starts, Mona immediately takes off. I feel like the symbolism in this scene is fairly obvious, with the apple representing Mona bringing forbidden knowledge into Max's perfect world of clearly defined roles of good and evil, dabbing a few shades of gray onto the black and white existence that he's made for himself since the events of the first game. The following gameplay sequence is, in my opinion, one of MP2's more memorable ones. The layout of Max Payne's apartment building is actually fairly complex, requiring a lot of exploration and shortcuts to properly escape. But on top of that, it flips the script on you. Unlike most of Part 1, we're not playing some liquored-up cruise missile aimed at a specific target, but instead we step into Max's shoes as he's on the back foot. The cleaners have taken the fight to him, and instead of forging forward towards some mission statement, he's just trying to make it out of this place alive.
Okay, hang on. We're on our way. We'll get you out.
Hurry.
In the process, he makes it to the sniper's nest and finds out that these guys were pulling some full-time surveillance on him, including tapping his phone calls, which leads to a completely missable but unbelievably important source of world-building exposition. Interacting with the recording device, you're first greeted with a message from Max's boss, Jim Bravura.
Hey, where are you? You're late again. Look, this insomnia crap isn't fooling anyone. I know what it's like. I just want to help. You should come to an AA meeting with me.
And this is such a vital piece of information to have in your pocket. Not necessarily for understanding the events of this game's story, but more for the lead up into its sequel. A topic that we'll need to wait a bit before we can dive into properly. After the voicemail from his boss, you can catch a recording that really paints a different picture of Max.
Hi, this is Mona. What's your name?
I just need someone to talk to.
Honey, this is a phone sex line. All we do is talk.
Right. How do you fix something like that? How do you make amends? I thought it would help, but it only made it worse.
Just give me your credit card number and I can listen to you all night.
Killing them all only made it worse. It didn't bring them back.
Hey, what are you, some kind of weirdo?
Sorry.
This entire time, Sam Lake's film noir writing has pinned our hero as just that. A tortured soul who struggles with the weight of what he's been through and the actions he's taken part in, but it's a movie-level depiction of hardship. He's made to look like your stereotypical picture of machismo, standing alone in the rain with a rock-hard look on his face. This one piece of audio, though, it shows him in a completely different light. It depicts a helpless, kind of pathetic side of the character. So desperate to get any portion of his demons out that he's resorted to calling a sex line to get something even resembling therapy. Nowadays, this is one of those must-talk-about moments for anyone hoping to conduct even the most surface-level analysis of the game, but when I first heard these 20 or so seconds of dialogue, I remember it feeling deeply personal. I didn't see a lot of people mentioning it online, and that lent this optional sequence a bit of staying power in my head. It really made an impact, and to this day, I think it'll stay with me as one of the most convincing examples of a piece of media transcending the boundaries of its medium and becoming a part of me. Ironically, though, that moment of surreal realization and deep introspection is almost directly followed up by this slapstick work of art.
Once upon a time, it had been a house in the suburbs.
He opens the door, and boom!
Now, nothing was left of it.
So the Escape the Cleaners game plan just morphed into a Escape the Rapidly Crumbling Apartment Complex one, which you can accomplish by joining forces with a homeless ex-cop and a prostitute if you want to. There's really no consequence for letting either of them die or even doing the job yourself, but I have never once, not even a single time, let that happen. I will and have reloaded quick saves all day long to make sure these two degens make it to the end of the stage with me, despite there being no prize whatsoever for that outcome. They will provide a bit of cover from above in the ensuing firefight, but to be honest, their contributions are so minimal that I only realized like 10 years ago that they do actually fire at the cleaners. You'll see this kind of situation repeat itself a couple times throughout the campaign, once with Mike the Cowboy and again with a group of Gagnetti's mafiosos. And each time I find myself doing everything I can to keep them alive, despite them being determined to make that as hard a job as possible. It seems like such a nothing inclusion. I mean, there's no reward or consequences for your actions, which I think is what makes it such a genius move. Just give the player something they might enjoy. If they don't, no big deal, but if they do, well then you've just allowed them to create their own meta mechanic, a metric for failure that's self-imposed. You gotta love that kind of open-ended thinking. With the cleaners making their exit, we're taken to Max getting chewed out by Bravura because somehow his being targeted by a paramilitary kill squad shows a real lack of police know-how on his end.
Innocent people got killed. You didn't do your job, Payne.
Payne lets his boss in on the fact that Gagnetti seems to have an in with some mysterious third party, and the smart money says it's the cleaners. But of course he purposefully omits the part where all of this was spurred on by the long-thought dead Mona Sachs showing up on his doorstep. And he really is conflicted about this, totally aware that all of his rationalizations are just excuses to justify him going over the deep end, reaching beyond the boundaries of his position and making this all personal business. Back at his desk, Max finds that Mona left him a number to get in contact with her, and like an idiot, he makes that call well within earshot of his partner. Like we've already established though, Max is all in on this one, and this guy isn't well known for being smart when he's emotionally involved. Just before he leaves, Wintersing gives him an ominous warning and tells him not to do anything stupid, which, like, do you know who you're talking to? This is Max, king of doing dumb shit Payne. Consider yourself lucky if he somehow avoids getting into a firefight on the way to the parking lot. Mona turns out to be shacking up in an abandoned funhouse dedicated to an in-universe psychological thriller called Address Unknown. The process to getting up to her room is essentially a straight shot and, oddly enough, doesn't involve any combat, but it's probably one of the game's standout levels, which is thanks to a visual presentation style that holds up well even today and the absolute density of classic Max quotes.
When entertainment turns to a surreal reflection of your life, you're a lucky man if you can laugh at the joke. Luck and I weren't on speaking terms.
Once Payne makes it up to Mona's room, he finds her in the showers. And hear me out on this one, because this has always bothered me. So like the Max Payne series is one where the developers expect you're going to try and interact with things in the environment. Cabinets open, sinks run, hand dryers turn on. So when I first came across this moment in Mona's room where you can hear that she's in the shower, the first thing that came to my mind is that I can totally fuck with her by flushing the toilet, but nothing happens at all. Am I crazy, or is that a huge missed opportunity? Oh yeah, we should probably also explain this. So Max Payne 2 has widescreen resolution options built into its launcher, but it also kinda doesn't. Using any of the 16:9 resolution settings out of the box will just stretch the game horizontally, and for some reason this seems to be a really well-kept secret among content creators. Because if you look up any Max Payne 2 videos, old or new, here on YouTube, you've got like an 8 out of 10 chance of seeing this little chubby Danny DeVito looking guy in their footage. The silhouette life gauge in the corner is always a dead giveaway. So with that in mind, we're using 13AG's widescreen fix, which properly opens up the viewable screen space, places HUD elements correctly, and removes the letterboxing from both the comic book and in-engine cutscenes. And the only real downside is that the game's cinematics weren't made with a wider aspect ratio in mind, so you may come across rare scenarios where assets that weren't meant to be seen will show up outside the borders of 4:3 and act kinda strange. One of the upsides, though, is finding out Mona was, fully modeled in 3D. Nipples, butt crack, the whole package. And that always got me wondering, like, why do that? I mean, I don't think they ever intended to show her fully nude in the game. This scene's actually supposed to be framed like this, so it's not like the player would ever be able to see her breast in full. So why make them so anatomically correct? I remember a similar issue coming up when modders were able to take control of the camera in 2013's Beyond Two Souls, a game that similarly never planned to have any nude images on screen. I'm not really sure what's going on with texture artists in the game industry, but I always got a kick out of imagining some employee at Remedy or Quantic Dream showing up to work one day with "make nipple texture" written on a little post-it note attached to their monitor. Getting back to business though, Max and Mona finally have a full 2 seconds to talk alone. According to the only paid assassin in the room, the Inner Circle is targeting anyone who's aware of their existence, and she's got an informant on the inside willing to prove it.
Alfred Woden?
No. Anyways, I can take you to him.
Heading over to meet up with the guy though, the two find out that the cleaners are also onto him, and Max reasons that it's probably better if the police officer is the only one potentially shooting people here. So he heads up with Mona staying at the front desk using the security cameras to help him get to the right room. Interestingly, this is the first time Max has thought to ask Mona about her previous status of being dead as all hell, but she's not exactly forthcoming with specifics.
How come you're alive anyway? I saw you take a bullet to the head.
Maybe it's still there. Keeps me focused.
The path to their informant's apartment is dotted with cleaners who are taking care of multiple targets, so it seems like these guys are taking out other members of the Inner Circle living in the building. Yeah, it looks like we have ourselves a good old-fashioned secret society civil war on our hands. On the way back down to Mona, Max is confronted by Kaufman, one of the cleaner higher-ups. Back in the lobby, Winterson has shown up, and Payne makes his entrance just as they're putting Mona in handcuffs. Not the best look for him. And hear me out, because as Max was making these decisions, I was all in. I mean, fuck yeah, Mona, lead the way. Let's figure out what the hell the Inner Circle's up to. But after that post-gunfight clarity hit, I found myself on Bravora's side. Like, sure, it may have sounded good at the time, but imagine trying to explain to your boss that the only reason you kept an accused murderer out of custody is so she could help you investigate a secret organization you can't even prove exists. And to his credit, Max is pretty understanding. I mean, after his boss takes him off the streets and sticks him behind a desk, our guy's essentially like, yeah, fair enough. After getting chewed out, you can either go straight to the lineup room to find out that Mona's being taken to the holding cells and progress the story forward, or there's the much more satisfying option of just fucking around for a little bit. I already talked about the immersionary value at this point, but I really can't overstate how much of a vibe this whole sequence is. I mean, if you walk around this place with some headphones on and the right kind of weather outside, you've got yourself some of the most atmospheric gaming physically imaginable. It's genuinely fun being able to explore even a sliver of Max's version of New York without the stress of incoming projectiles aimed at your general vicinity. Just taking a deep breath of that scumbag air and enjoying all the small details you would have missed out on if you were slow-mo diving through this place looking for the next chest cavity to hollow out. There's about 1 million tiny world-building details for you to stumble onto here. Nothing so significant that it's necessary for enjoying the game, but just small tidbits that help this world feel a little more lived in and realistic. On top of that, it offers up a very nice breadcrumb trail of story that can help you figure out later plot revelations, or at the very least give them a far greater amount of context.
Better get Winterson. She's been kind of edgy about her calls.
Really though, the standout feature here is the ability to take a load off and relax with the boys in the break room watching an episode of Lords and Ladies. And that might have come across as a joke, but honestly, I have spent an unknowable amount of time in this room over the years. I mean, the relatively small size of the place, the worn-in looking couch, the auditory ambiance of the drink machine and the portable AC unit humming in the background, it all makes for the perfect environment to find a couple of overworked guys and a few steaming hot mugs of coffee. We're talking off the charts levels of cozy.
Jack, my favorite son, you have done right in turning to me in this distasteful affair.
Heading down to the holding cells, Mona breaks with the Ice Queen act for a bit. She seems legitimately scared that the cleaners could still get to her in here, but to Max it reads like her trying to use their relationship to manipulate him. Something that's not exactly well outside the realm of possibility. She says that Woden can back her Inner Circle Civil War story though, so Max heads to the nearest phone to reach out to an old friend. And then boom, it's an all-out attack on the NYPD and by extension, that incredibly cozy room. The point seems to be to keep Mona from talking, but she's resourceful enough to make that job harder for him. After taking care of at least a quarter of the invading force, Max tries to link up with Mona, but she's long gone. Luckily, he knows where she's headed, and dearest of all of his friends just so happens to be available for a lift. On the way to Mona's funhouse, Max grills Vlad for any corroboration he can get, and it turns out the Russian is well aware of the Inner Circle, making their status as a secret society a little suspect. The two reason that Vinny's mob war probably aligns with the conflict going on in the Inner Circle, so the two sides have more than likely joined forces in some way. Then the conversation turns towards Mona.
I hear she is a stone fox. I would fuck her.
Fuck her right in her pussy.
Followed by what may at first seem like an unrelated rant about fate and doing bad shit. Once he's caught up to her, Max gets fairly in-depth with his investigation, but the cleaners show up and put a stop to the first bit of action that Max has had in years that didn't end with someone on the floor dead. The two make an attempt at heading for Mona's base of operations, but when a catwalk gives way, they're forced to take a divide and conquer sort of approach. The resulting gauntlet equals out to what I would say are some of the most interesting combat scenarios in the game. There's this really great mix of enemy placements with both you and them taking positions of differing elevations. Plus, the funhouse props and bare lumber framing make for a great visual backdrop to the killing and the carnage. All of this culminating in Max for like the third time catching the tail end of a fleet of escaping cleaners which he is understandably tired of. So he pulls a Trojan horse on these fools. Only in this scenario, the horse isn't filled with Greek soldiers, but instead a single, semi-sober New York detective, posing arguably just as much of a threat. Luckily, Max still has the headset from the apartment raid in his pocket, so he's able to tell Mona when he arrives at the massive construction site the cleaners are using as a hideout. Man, back in the day, I used to laugh my ass off at the idea of Max not even waiting till this guy's friends were out of earshot before hollowing his head out.
Hey, what the fuck?
It does seem like a bit of a mess up on Remedy's end, but keeping in mind the amount of these guys Max has already put in the ground, like, what would they be able to do even if they did hear him? Now that Payne's on their turf, there's no real reason for them to keep up the whole cleaning crew facade, so they whip out a full commando kit, tactical balaclavas very much included. Reaching one of the top floors of the warehouse, Max stumbles across a room filled with the assassin's victims, a jackpot of evidence that would not only put the cleaners away but prove that his and Winterson's cases were actually connected, which stands a chance at pulling at least a bit of the heat off of his back for being caught with Mona at the scene of a massacre before. And you know, in some universe, maybe that's how things would have went down. But here in Max's, the cleaners bust in and unintentionally set off a series of explosives that domino into bringing most of the building down around them. Left with only one option, Max takes a header out of a window and, all things considered, comes out way better than he should have. From here, we take a short trip back in time and change perspectives to Mona, covering her action shortly after showing up to rescue Max. In terms of gameplay, this character change may only amount to a costume swap, as the two play identically outside of Mona's awesome little cartwheel. But as the narrative goes, it pulls off a really cool little trick. Throughout Max's path through this place, these two have had radio conversations on and off, and now we're privy to the context behind some of the banter exchanged between the two.
Mona, these guys are packing. Close to overkill. Hardcore professionals.
It doesn't seem that way from where I'm standing.
What's that supposed to mean? Mona, these guys are packing. Close to overkill. Hardcore professionals.
Whoa!
Doesn't seem that way from where I'm standing.
Shake it, baby, shake it!
After Mona takes up a few sharpshooter positions and covers Payne while he looks for a way out of his enclosed courtyard, which, by the way, is one of the most trial and error sections in a game that has some pretty good competition on that front, the two finally link up, only they're joined by Winterson. And this scene is admittedly kind of tough on a first watch, because on one end, Max's partner is rightfully detaining an armed murder suspect, but on the other, Mona is convinced that Winterson is on the inner circle take, an agent working on behalf of the people who want her dead. From Max's perspective, this is a genuine conundrum. Like, how is it even remotely possible to cool this situation down to the point where any kind of actual discussion can take place? And even more importantly, how am I going to continue describing the events of this game's story without spoiling it for you guys? Hopefully you know the deal. Skip past the chapter marked spoilers to avoid ruining your own playthrough of this film noir detective story. Don't worry, we'll see you on the other side when I'm ready to summarize things in a more general, vague sense.
That won't help a thing. The bullet in my head brought me to you.
Okay, so Mona, Payne, and Winterson are taking part in one hell of a tense Mexican standoff. Both sides, as far as Max is concerned, have good reason to be pissed, and for sure, this guy doesn't want either of the two getting hurt. Mona is one of the few pieces of his past that has yet to bleed out in his arms, and Winterson, on top of being Max's partner for some time now, she's got a little blind son at home to take care of. To say the least, this shit is high stakes, and when both make a move to off one another, a single shot rings out.
Winterson!
Winterson stumbles to the ground with a hole in her stomach, and then there's Max, with a look on his face to suggest he's just about as surprised as we are that he just did that. The deafening silence of this moment is eventually broken by approaching cops, so Payne tells Mona to get out of there, and just when he's ready to take responsibility for what he did, Winterson manages to make her last act on this earth, repaying her partner double what he gave her, leaving Max Payne to fall into a pit both literally and metaphorically. As a team of doctors pull out all the stops to get him back to the land of the living, Max is forced to spend his time inside the one place that he avoids most, the inner reaches of his own guilt-stricken mind. This nightmare sequence is like the last one we went through, only on a much grander scale. Here Max is faced with aspects of his personality he tends to suppress, can rewatch events that brought him here on TV, and relive them with a slightly different outcome. But with a hard cut, we're taken back to the game's ending again, with Max and Mona somewhere surrounded by cops who are rapidly closing in. And Max, of course, does what he does best, breaks down psychological trauma into poetic metaphor.
It was the other way around. He kisses her to wake himself up from the nightmare that has brought him there.
One fade to black later, and we've been shot back to the hospital to pick up where we left off at the game's intro. Max is standing over the body of his dead partner as he deals with the grief of being the man who put her there, his coping strategy being that of the chemical variety. As he numbs the pain, both inside and out, Max notices a matchbook on the body, one sporting a familiar logo. After making it out of a hospital filled with assassins there to kill him, Max wanders the city, beat to shit and holding several puzzle pieces that just don't seem to fit together. So he heads to the last lead that Mona gave up, Alfred Woden, which turns out to be one hell of an information-filled house call. Alfred tells Max that he's got cancer, just the right size chink in his armor to inspire someone to take a shot at the king, explaining the civil war Mona described. And the revelation of who's leading the charge likely isn't going to be too surprising for those of you who've been paying attention to the tiny details so far.
We have been reduced to fighting mob wars.
Vinny Gognitti?
Vladimir Lem.
Although for those who haven't, it was kind of easy to miss because this game is so good about not lingering on the small stuff. For example, Vlad's arm being in a sling back at vodka, and the phrase Mona was forced to repeat in the lineup.
You are nothing but a one-armed bandit.
Then there's Vlad showing up just as the cleaners attack the police precinct, and his vague musings on fate. Each one almost meaningless on its own, but when you line them all up, you get a glimpse at the subplot that was happening right under your nose. Sure, you couldn't really have assumed that Vlad was actually a part of the inner circle and even the protege of Woden himself, but the breadcrumbs leading to his direct involvement in all of this were right there from the start. And if we can all realize that, I'm sure Max did too. So instead of walking one step behind Vlad, Max decides to take the fight directly to him by showing up to Vodka. And after ridding New York of a few Russian mobsters, he discovers a treasure trove of evidence that at this point isn't all too necessary. But just in case there was a sliver of doubt in Max's brain, right here under Vlad's new restaurant sits the cleaner's vans, uniforms, and tactical gear. Up in his personal office, Vlad's habit of plotting his capers on dry erase boards clues Max into his next move. And over on his desk, we get to listen to a voicemail left by Winterson that clears a few things up.
Vlad, it's me. Where are you? I need you. I'm on my way to the construction site now.
Winterson.
I'll do it. I'll take care of them both for you.
Her and Vlad were romantically involved, and she was willing to do just about anything he asked of her, meaning that night at the construction site, Max did make the right move. As he drives one of the cleaner's vans over to Vinny's place, Max thinks on what all of this means, and he lets this line loose that always confused me.
Winterson's confession didn't wash away my guilt. It made me feel worse.
I mean, I would think this would be the first thing someone like Max Payne would be looking for, a get out of emotional torment free card. But you know, after all these years, I think I finally understand what he means. Like, sure, his actions were proven technically correct after the fact, but he didn't shoot her knowing any of this. He did it for Mona, full stop. If anything, finding out he was justified just made him feel worse. I mean, think about it. Vlad is, if nothing, one charming son of a bitch.
Scout's honor, detective. I have mended my ways, evolved to a higher level.
Like, if this is how smooth he is while talking to one of his buddies, just imagine the kind of shit he gets up to with the ladies. So when Max says that he feels even worse after learning Winterson was working for Vlad the whole time, I think what he's getting at is the fact that he was forced to kill somebody who was being manipulated by the best in the business. And when it all comes down to it, he did this to save a woman that he already feels guilty for having feelings for. It's like Winterson never even stood a chance. I mean, Vlad went as far as to form a relationship with her blind kid.
Been taking care of her blind kid on her own. No wonder she's edgy.
They haven't seen you with my boy. Haven't seen you with me.
She was completely wrapped around his finger. So instead of her betrayal giving him some well-deserved relief, it just revealed that both Max and Winterson were being manipulated, played against one another like chess pieces. And getting back to the plans in Lem's office, once again, this is not new information. In Max's first trip to Vodka at the start of the game, an early version of this same plan could be seen right here in the same place. And during the conversation in the car after the precinct attack, his Trojan horse was sitting right there in the back seat. I mean, sure, this isn't exactly the ending of The Usual Suspects, but as a teenager playing through this thing for the first time, I can remember being absolutely awestruck at the level of care given to this story structure and how it unfolds itself to the player. If I did have to change one aspect of it, though, it would be the scene where the game goes a little too hard trying to push the Winterson being on the take angle.
They're taking the fall, both of them. Payne was with her when she was arrested.
Who are you talking to? You're leaking information.
Bravura's too soft on you. I was informing the proper authorities on what they should know.
I'm not saying that it's impossible to think she would be giving Vlad updates over the phone, but as a narrative device, Max just happening upon this conversation takes away the fun of piecing it together yourself. It's not necessarily a bad piece of writing, but in a game filled with 10 out of 10s, this 6 or 7 just sort of stands out. Getting back to Max's attempt to insert himself into the Russian versus Italian mob war going on, his choice of ride turns out to be poorly thought out as Vinny's goons take him for an enemy. Which, to be fair, it's not like they're wrong. Working his way through the battlefield this decrepit neighborhood had become, Max runs into a group of Vinny's goons who assume he's fighting on their side. And with Payne's leather jacket and haircut, that is an understandable assumption to make.
I guess one extra gun's better than nothing.
The sequence that follows is honestly some of the most fun you can possibly have in a video game. There's Russian commandos front flipping over barricades, Mafia Americans getting lit on fire, and more bullets flying through the air than raindrops. all culminating in a goon with a slightly higher IQ pointing out that this squad had been running with the infamous Max Payne, which forced me to say goodbye to the greaseballs I had grown to love by pulling off one of the coolest maneuvers humanly imaginable.
What is this? What the fuck are you doing with him? He's
A little later, Max finds Vinny in a position befitting of his general aura. There's no love lost between the two since the last time they crossed paths, but Gognitti leverages possible knowledge of Vlad's whereabouts to talk Max into a fairly annoying escort mission. So after probably save-scumming your way into intimate knowledge of every enemy spawn in this section, you'll make it into Vinny's apartment, which reveals why he would be in this situation in the first place. Oh, and fun fact, there's a non-zero chance that Gognitti gets caught in the geometry of this door if you're running the game in widescreen. I have no idea why, but I've never ran into this issue in 4x3. When the two are able to make their escape, Max figures Mona will know more about bomb disposal than he does, but Vinny argues that she's actually on the cleaner side, which doesn't make any damn sense given the amount of them we personally watched her gun down. Desperate to get back in touch with his femme fatale, though, the two head to her funhouse hideout, but they're instead greeted by one of the most diabolical quotes in video games.
Max, dearest of all my friends.
Vlad's got these two by the balls, but the game pulls its non-linear timeline shenanigans to switch to Mona's perspective as she comes across the chaos just after whatever happened. And honestly, I always appreciated Remedy making it clear just how much Mona cares for Max in the scene, with her rushing into a burning, collapsing building to save him. Once she gets to the spot where the three-way standoff took place, I won't lie, I was sad to see Gognitti go. Like, yeah, he sucked, but he sucked in that endearing kind of way. This may or may not have been strengthened by me finding out the two of us have a similar habit of collecting useless memorabilia.
Nothing nerdy about it. I'm a collector. No, Payne, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Further into the place, we find Max with one hell of a head wound, a scenario that gets explained when the story shifts backwards to reveal the specifics of what went down just before the place got a Vinny Gognitti paint job. And here we are, two brothers caught on opposite sides of a civil war. His words. And the ensuing conversation sheds a lot of light on the events of the first game. It turns out the Project Valhalla dossier that Max's wife accidentally opened was sent by Woden. With his hands tied by Nicole Horn's blackmail, the one-eyed senior citizen tried to anonymously put a stop to her plans concerning V. Miss Payne was just collateral damage. And to further complicate things, according to Vlad, Mona is cashing Woden's checks at the moment, taking out members of the inner circle loyal to Vlad. And I think this right here explains why he's so gung-ho about getting rid of Max. It turns out this moment right here at the start of the game where Max realizes that Mona's still alive essentially sealed his fate. Vlad's plans of taking control of the inner circle will ultimately lead to Woden and by extension his hired assassin Mona being taken out. Which would have been perfectly fine if Payne had continued thinking that she was dead from her head wound at Acer Tower. But now that he knows she's alive, well, I think we've all seen how persistent Max can be when it comes to avenging murdered loved ones. Although it's not like Vlad isn't also motivated by revenge.
A gentleman always avenges the insults done to his lady. You did kill Winterson.
And you really do have to marvel at Remedy's penchant for putting Max Payne through hell. By this point in the story, he survived an exploding building, 2 center mass gunshots, a car crash, and headbutting the game's most powerful pistol chambered in 50 cal. The resulting dream sequence is even more introspective than the previous ones he's experienced. A journey through guilt and helplessness, spiced up with a look of what happened between Vinny and Vlad after Max took his Desert Eagle knockout punch. Once he makes it back into the land of the living, Mona delivers one hell of an argument.
This isn't your fight, Max. You can walk away.
I mean, this is a fight between two sides of a secret society that he could care less about. The only person in this conversation obligated to take part in this micro-war is Mona, and it's clear she really does care about Payne enough to try to keep him out of it. But that's just not how this particular ginned-up detective works, so the two join forces in a raid on Woden's manor. Also, a funny little detail I noticed is that Max takes like 2 or 3 hits in this cutscene. I guess the game's ballistic calculations can be a little random. Once Payne makes it to the security room, it's revealed that Woden's men have switched sides, but with Woden stuck inside of his safe room, there's still time to get to him. When Mona and Max meet back up, though, she proves Vladimir's earlier warning true. She is most definitely working for Woden, and part of her job is to take Max out of the picture. But for the second time in as many games, she's unable to kill him. A humane act that would prove to be her last.
You're a bastard, Max.
This is love. Love hurts.
And there he was, once again cradling the body of a dead woman who he loved. At this point, it's kind of hard to believe that Max was ever meant for anything other than this. A kind of tortured lightning rod meant to redirect the world's pain and misery to a single spot. Alfred Woden, motivated by all of the death and destruction, decides to finally come out of hiding and face his prodigal son, getting 2 in the stomach for his efforts.
You flatter yourself.
Demented fool!
Then Max and Vlad start going at it, which, like most events in the game so far, is punctuated by a massive explosion. And I gotta say, I just absolutely love the idea that Vlad doesn't even try ending things with his bare hands here. I mean, even without a weapon and just barely alive, he knows that Max Payne is a machine meant to turn asses into kicked asses. Also, plus several points for this banger of a one-liner.
I was compelled to give Vlad his gun back. One bullet at a time.
On the way up to the final confrontation, you can listen to a few answering machine messages that puts a nice little bow on the story so far. First is a confirmation that Mona wasn't playing some role, but truly in love with Max.
I'm not sure I can do this. I told you we had a history. I'm mad about this guy.
And second is Vlad laying out his honest motivation for all this destruction.
Would it have killed you to say thank you for once in your life? To say, Vlad, my son. Can I call you my son? Because I sure do love you like one.
Annie, Bravura, Winterson, Mona, Woden, thousands of cleaners and mafia goons, all dead because Vladimir Lem was desperate for validation from his criminal father figure. And to be totally honest with you, that would have hit a lot harder if the next time we saw him wasn't a fight for who got to use Woden's little stair-mounted wheelchair elevator. For the last encounter, though, the game brings back the Nicole Horn fight at the end of Part 1, which I think is just about the only thing that they could have done. I mean, ideally, the final boss in any game should probably be a really tough challenge, but Max Payne 2's entire ethos is built around the idea that the main character and the people he's shooting at are standing on roughly the same ground in terms of health and damage output. So turning the finale into a puzzle makes it a little more satisfying when you finish Vladimir Lem off with less than a third of a magazine. The battle ending with one last utterance of the Russian's famous catchphrase.
Max, dearest of all my friends, I was supposed to be the hero.
Which, if you ask me, should have been where things cut. It's not that I don't enjoy watching his ragdolled body fall like 60 feet to the ground and catch on fire, but it does seem a little undignified given his narrative importance. The final cutscene of the game is one last look at the sequence it's flashed at us 2 or 3 times now, only we get to see the entire picture. What at first appeared to be a portrait of Mona with a red backdrop is revealed to be her silhouetted against a pool of her own blood, her last words being,
God, I turned out to be such a damsel in distress.
And we're left with Max in a ghastly familiar position, commenting on how this moment, this loss, had made him look back and see himself. A way of him describing the reason the story's played out in such a non-linear format, because for us it was a winding path with multiple time jumps, but for Max, it was a series of retrospective memories rank-ordered by importance and emotional value. As the cops rush the crumbling building that used to be Alfred Woden's personal estate, they find Max, rocking a look that, in all honesty, it still hits me right at my core. To me, it's the face of a man who's reached the absolute pinnacle of human suffering. Physical and emotional wounds deep enough that they should have taken him out, but there he is, alive when everyone around him is dead. And in the end, we're left with easily the most impactful words that Max Payne has ever spoken.
I had a dream of my wife. She was dead. But it was all right.
Everything that happened here, in spite of its brutality, the betrayal, the loss, and revelation, it was closure. Max never really mourned the death of his wife, Michelle. Instead, he used her loss as fuel to complete a job that frankly needed to be done. And now that he's been thrown into the same Ouroboros-esque cycle again, he's able to find some semblance of peace. Or maybe that's not the right word. Understanding. It's an ending appropriate for the character and the situation this franchise found itself in. There's emotional clarity in it and a sense of growth, but it's not the final word on the matter.
Bang! You're dead, Max Payne.
The story of Max Payne 2 is, in my opinion, some of the best writing you'll find in this medium. What was in the first game a simple tale of revenge is made complex when the characters grow from fairly one-dimensional archetypes into flawed, fully realized versions of themselves. It also takes itself dead serious. It accepts some of its more outlandish elements and it owns them straight up. It's an evolution in every sense of the word. The first Max Payne was amazingly unique and a showcase of honest talent, but at the end of the day, it stood almost as a caricature of itself, a tale told through a tongue pressed firmly against the cheek. Part 2, on the other hand, takes all the same concepts, characters, and themes, but develops them into fully fledged ideas. Having said that, though, one aspect that jumped out at me during this most recent playthrough is just how much of Part 1 exists here in the sequel. I mean, you can count the amount of newly introduced characters in the Fall of Max Payne on a single hand, one that's dabbled in homemade fireworks. And honestly, I don't think it would be totally out of line for a person to assume this is due to a strict development timeline or apathy for the project, but I choose a more glass of whiskey half full position. I think Sam Lake understood that the raw materials he created in Max Payne 1 were just that. Excellent collections of ideas and concepts just waiting to be shaped into fully formed personalities. It's like the perfect answer to the question, where does the boundary between fan service and reference lie? Instead of each character being pushed out on stage to some nostalgic gamer applause, this is just the continuation of a story. The closing of a loop that started when a few junkies broke into an unassuming house in residential New Jersey and killed one Michelle Payne. I think the best way I can explain it is, if someone were to chronicle your Wednesday afternoon, I would assume a lot of the people from Tuesday would be making an appearance as well.
Isn't that a bit melodramatic?
Getting back to the idea of polishing a diamond, though, I don't think you can throw a rock in this game's narrative without hitting a concept or aspect of it that's been significantly improved on. I mean, take the voice acting, for instance. I think we can all agree that the late James McCaffrey gave an incredible performance in his breakout role as the Hawaiian-shirted walking film noir metaphor. But, if I'm being honest, it did feel a little flat emotionally. All of Max's lines were delivered in a monotone affectation that was no doubt a conscious effort, but on his second time around, this guy breathed genuine life into the character.
A V deal meant added security, locked doors, and lots of nervous thugs with itchy trigger fingers. I'd seen nothing coming in, but that didn't mean it hadn't been there. The dead had all the answers I was missing. It wasn't that they weren't eager to talk. Quite the contrary. The dead had plenty to say.
Those dry mids and dirty lows are definitely still present, but this time around they're surrounded by emotional peaks and valleys. His more robotic, detached tones from the first game saved only for his inner monologues here, the one place where he would be the most collected. I think Max sounds much more natural now. His voiceover dropping the fast delivery from Part 1 that made it sound like he was speeding through his lines. Here in Part 2, you can tell there was a real focus on verbal punctuation, leaving room for his lines to breathe and give more impact.
Gognitti ran out of steam in a dead-end alley with steam boiling out of the sewer grates like all the fires of hell were burning high beneath us. Einstein was right. Time is relative to the observer. When you're looking down the barrel of a gun, time slows down.
And I don't necessarily mean to focus on McCaffrey. I mean, everyone who stepped up to the mic in this game brought the very best they had.
This one's evil. It has only started. I don't like it. I don't like it a bit. It's yours, Payne.
Max, I'm not here to kill you. Aren't you going to ask me in?
I'm doing my duty. She is a fugitive murder suspect. I'm taking her in.
Annie was a princess. They killed her for no reason.
It was utter and significant improvements all around. I just think it's hard to argue that James McCaffrey's new version of Max didn't steal the show. The story's format is also more complex this time around, shifting almost randomly between its ending, middle, and start, building expectations in the player and then often subverting them. Coming from a guy who writes something like 12 to 18 pages of script every 2 weeks or so, it's obvious Sam Lake put some real effort into honing his craft in between releases. Max Payne 1 is essentially a Model T. Innovative, a first of its kind, and a result of ingenuity, but its sequel is a Trueno AE86, the same concept only perfected through experience and revision. And upon subsequent replays, I've really come to appreciate just how much storytelling Max Payne 2 puts right in front of your eyes if you're looking in the right spots. Little details in an interaction with a coworker, foreshadowing stuffed in the background of a conversation, and tidbits eager to reveal themselves if you fight the urge to run into every room like a ginned-up human Gatling gun. Honestly, it feels like you can scrape just a little more appreciation for its narrative framework out of every new run. It's the movie that gets better with every rewatch. As a teenager first playing Max Payne 2, I can clearly remember the effect its story had on me. At the time, like most people who enjoy media, I really only had a rudimentary idea of what I did and did not like, lacking the general need to deeply analyze the reasons behind those ideas that come in handy with my current occupation. Even at that point, though, I could feel a vague sense of, and I don't often use this word, but maturity. I had played an uncountable number of games that elicited an emotional reaction out of me by this time, but admittedly, I had to play a role in that response, filling in patchy character traits or actively ignoring inconsistencies. Max Payne 2, though, was the first time I had played a video game that seemed to unfold itself exactly like a movie or a book. Not that those mediums are somehow better than video games in some objective sense, but I don't think I need to remind anybody that gaming had to work its way up to benchmarks of emotionally effective storytelling like The Last of Us, for example. In a word, it's perfect. From the mouth of an incredibly biased source, this might be one of the best stories in video games, period. And Max Payne? He very well may be one of the best characters I've ever taken control of, bar none. You know, to be real with you, I'm not sure I can describe exactly what's happening, but I like the guy, and I sympathize with him. When he experiences life-shattering lows, I'm right down there with him. I know what you're thinking, and no, it's not in some kind of escapist sense of, hey, that's basically me. I mean, Max is a drunk pill addict living in New York. I've been drug, alcohol, and tobacco-free for about, more than 25 years now, and I'm way more smart about where I reside. Plus, I'm gonna level with you, I don't think I could reliably hit a target while diving through the air with a pistol in each hand. I already touched on this idea a second ago, but more than anything, I think it's sympathy. I mean, I've watched this guy go through hell and come back out of it twice now. He's essentially a kicked dog, and you really can't help but just want him to be okay. So his story has the potential to hit deeper down than maybe others might. This story, and more importantly, its effect on me, is something altogether special. And it's an effect that, if I'm being honest, I will probably never ever get again, which is bittersweet and kind of beautiful in a way.
What are you doing?
The million-dollar question I didn't have the answer to.
With Remedy's breakout hit acting as a showcase of their graphical talent, the expectations for Max Payne 2 were already through the roof. And while it would be difficult, if not impossible, to match the meme value of the first game's texture-mapped faces or the initial wow factor of the public's first introduction to bullet time, I would say Part 2 is every bit the massive technological leap that its predecessor was. Or maybe even more, depending on how you look at it. For example, did you know Max Payne 2 was built in the same exact engine as Part 1? I didn't, and if you would have told me that a few years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I mean, it's almost unreal how much better of an image this game can produce by comparison, but I think it also suffers from an issue that we're actually running into as an industry today. Okay, so hear me out. In almost every metric that I can possibly think of, this is a nearly generational improvement on Max Payne 1, but it's in a way that isn't immediately noticeable to somebody who isn't looking at it with the right eyes. Do you guys remember when Horizon Forbidden West was doing the pre-launch rounds and its devs were over the moon about showing off features like 3D mesh facial hairs or the way light would realistically bleed through objects? Now I can tell you for sure that is an amazing feat of technical wizardry, especially for the time, but how many of you gave even a molecule of a shit about that? Judging by the public's reaction, I'm gonna assume not a lot. This relates to Max Payne 2 in the sense that tons of effort went into improving the graphical framework of the game that came before it, but it was in ways that weren't gonna jump off a magazine ad and wow you. Like if you weren't already impressed with the way Max Payne used real-life pictures as 2D textures for everything from clothing to the environment, you probably weren't going to boot up Part 2 and be blown away that in most cases, those textures are displayed at much higher resolutions than before. Moving in the same direction as the gameplay, Remedy's approach to the presentation here wasn't in adding anything new but perfecting what already existed. The character models have significantly more complex geometry than before, lessening the boxy appearance they could have in Part 1. And the animations are far more detailed too, with the added frames and fluidity leading to a much more realistic look. Instead of little circles underneath everyone's feet, the light sources in Max Payne 2 cast real-time shadows, and shiny surfaces were graced with high-resolution planar reflections, adding an almost incalculable amount of depth and detail to the overall image. During the in-engine cutscenes, faces no longer swap between one or two Photoshop textures to show emotion, but instead that's replaced with actual 3D geometry that can articulate believably. I mean, the static expressions in Part 1 may have been endearing in a very, very cute kind of way, but being able to see someone's mouth open and close or their eyebrows move while they're speaking was a big step in achieving the more serious tone and story this game's going for. On the opposite end of that concept, I think sticking with the comic book panel cutscenes was a genius move. These things were an undeniable part of Max Payne's core identity, and the art in these sequences, while similar in style to the original, show off way more detail. Where the first game's cutscenes were obviously someone painting over real pictures, there's enough layers of effects over these new ones that I could be fooled into thinking they were actually hand-drawn. Some panels might show off more of the underlying photographs than others, but in most cases these images could pass for real comic book art any day of the week. Scouring the web for the source pictures used during development is honestly kind of surreal. I mean, seeing the actual actors in these iconic positions has given me a very weird, uncanny kind of feeling. It's really too bad that most of the resources available are the resolution of a postage stamp, because I'd love to flip through a big high-res book of these things. Like we already talked about, I'm using a widescreen mod here, which 98% of the time works perfectly. It opens up the viewable screen space of the game without stretching any 2D or 3D assets while correctly placing HUD elements. As far as these kind of mods go, it's basically the gold standard. The only point where it even stumbles a little will be in a very slim minority of the in-engine cutscenes where assets were set to load in outside the bounds of the 4x3 screen real estate the game was developed for. So you might be able to notice some weird stuff going on in the furthest left and right hand sides of the screen in maybe 3 or 4 sequences. For the vast majority of the time though, I would imagine you'd have to be looking for these anomalies to actually notice them. In terms of audio, just like the visuals, we're looking at a huge upgrade that might not be so noticeable without having the original nearby for direct comparison. Like I mentioned in the story section, the performances across the board show a lot more emotion. And if I had to guess, there was probably a voice coach in the booth with these actors, making sure certain keynotes were hit. Outside of that though, I can hear a massive upgrade in the quality of the VO recordings. The warmth and richness of Max's voice is much more present in Part 2, and while they didn't completely eliminate the wealth of mouth noises and clicking that was all over the place in Max Payne 1, it is kept to a much more manageable level here. And if that's not a phenomenon you're familiar with, first off, Lucky you. But when you speak into a microphone, along with your voice, it's also picking up all the little clicks, clacks, and pops that happen when saliva gets pushed out from between your gums and cheeks, or your tongue slaps up against the roof of your mouth. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, this next clip is going to be an untreated recording of me just opening and closing my mouth. An action that, in conversation, would probably be inaudible, but with a mic in your face is just about as loud as your speaking voice. With that utter nastiness in mind, listen to Max in the first game compared to his VO in Part 2.
I went for the hotel first. It was a sad old thing with flickering lamps and faded colors. Winterson was the ideal. What the job was all about. Someone to look up to. Bravura knew it too.
Again, it is still there to a degree, but it's obvious a lot of audio cleanup was applied as well. Continuing on the subject of sound though, I think the area where Max Payne 2 pulled out the most stops was in its soundtrack. Keeping in line with the more serious tone the story took, compositions here in Part 2 bring a much more powerful sense of emotional impact. Most tracks rely on a low-toned string ensemble as a heavy supporting bass, with something like a flute or synth licks providing highs that pierce through the darker back end, enforcing the mood of the piece. And there's a very noticeable trend towards a slow, weighty type of progression. I think the goal with the OST here was to better represent the film noir inspiration for both 1 and 2's story, and it'd be really hard to say they didn't hit that mark right on the center. As a whole, despite the same exact composer working on both titles, there's a full-bodied richness in Part 2's music that I can only call an upgrade. And I think that's due in large part to the cello compositions provided by Pertu Kivalakso, a man who, alongside looking like an 18th century vampire, is a member of the symphonic metal act Epica, which is an interesting little coincidence because I decided to start this YouTube channel on the way back from seeing them play live with Symphony X about 15 years ago, and a review of Max Payne 2 was the second video I ever released. And look at this little fucking dork. Fun story, I recorded this a week or so after getting my head cracked open and stitched back together. Fun times. Believe it or not though, there are a few things I enjoy even more than cranial injuries, and topping that list are video game ports. But I understand if that's not your particular kink, so head over to the chapter labeled Conclusion to skip past the unbridled autism ahead.
They're coming to kill me! You gotta protect me! We gotta get out of here! Through the backyard!
Max Payne 2 received 2 official ports outside of its original platform, both on the prevailing home consoles of the day. But Jared, what about the GameCube?
What about the GameCube?
So sadly that means no weird-ass Game Boy Advance version this time. Just like before, porting duties were left up to Rockstar, and since Neo Software did such a good job at porting Max Payne 1 to the Xbox 2 years prior, Take-Two acquired the company, named them Rockstar Vienna, and put them in charge of retrofitting its sequel to run on home consoles. Oh, and don't worry, the game only officially showing up on 2 platforms does not mean we're only going to be looking at those 2 versions. Remember, where most fall short, Jared provides.
We need to leave now. More cleaners in the lobby coming your way.
I wasn't ready to go.
Alright, starting off with the Xbox, since that was Max Payne 1's best performing platform, we have a 480p image, a 60 frame per second target, and both 4:3 and 16:9 aspect ratios. On that note though, the widescreen mode, instead of drawing more graphics on screen, just zooms into the boundaries of its native 4:3 output to fill the sides of your display. This expectedly cuts off a fair bit of the top and bottom of the screen. In the example here, you can see that the fluorescent light on the ceiling is much further away from the top of the screen on the standard 4x3 mode, and Max's feet are cut out of the picture in 16:9. Plus, there's a slight discrepancy on the side, with the table on the left and the bed on the right getting cut off a bit as well. Frankly, this is not the worst way to achieve widescreen we'll be looking at today, but it felt a little claustrophobic to me, so I decided to stick with 4x3. Which proved to be a good choice because for some reason the graphic novel panels get squished in the widescreen mode, which I don't really understand because you could have just left them in the center of the screen. Now, I'm not saying I would have liked this, but it would have made sense if they would have stretched the graphic novel images to fill the entire screen, but instead they squished them to fill less than even 4x3. I don't know, that's really weird to me. Well, anyway, in terms of presentation, the Xbox port of Max Payne 2 looks fantastic. When viewed side by side, you can see where some concessions were made in terms of texture resolution, but as far as I'm concerned, this is the absolute best case scenario when PC to console video game ports are concerned. It is just a wildly impressive image, both compared to the original or when you just view it on its own. I'm not sure why, but for me there's something about old 480p aliasing that looks so much more pleasing than the extra sharp effect of old PC games being made to run at 4K. The softer edges are just so much nicer to look at, and the lower output resolution doesn't give you quite so many opportunities to notice any of the rough texture work that a high-res PC version might highlight. On the grounds of performance, things are a little less than perfect, but far from bad in my opinion. The first game's Xbox port was wildly impressive with how consistent its frame rate could be, but along with the graphical upgrades seen in Part 2, we have a slightly less incredible outcome. I found that while the game can hover around its target of 60 in some scenarios, it more often bounces back and forth between the 45 to 55 FPS range. It can feel kinda nasty when there's a lot going on with a bunch of characters on screen, but I definitely wouldn't call it severely detrimental. Honestly, the kind of person who isn't very sensitive to frame rate fluctuations could probably play this version of the game and never feel much of a difference at all. Essentially, the average frame rate in this port is perfectly playable. When it does dip enough for you to notice, it can feel kind of gross, but I didn't find those low spots to ever get in the way of moving or shooting. We'll say it's a solid B. Just like its console predecessor, there are a few extra load zones thrown into what were seamless environments on PC, but the load times were snappy enough that this didn't bother me at all. I am running the game off of the Xbox's internal hard drive though, so there is a chance your mileage will vary. Outside of that, I was able to find an interesting little anomaly in the cutscene where Winterson saves Max from being smashed by the van. There's supposed to be 2 cops here. You know, to be honest, I'm tempted to play through the rest of the game just to see if there are any other discrepancies like this one. As far as any complaints go, really the only thing that bothered me was how blurry the game can get in the dream sequences or in bullet time. The screen just gets way more distorted here than it does on PC, and honestly it kind of hurt my eyes a bit to look at it for long periods. Outside of that, I have absolutely no issues calling this a near perfect port. The controls felt great right out of the box with no tweaking, the frame rate is okay enough to not be a problem, the presentation is downright impressive, and outside of one missing police officer in a cutscene, you can count on this being a completely faithful rendition of the original. It's just flat out great. Fair warning though, things are only gonna get significantly worse from here on.
You're not even trying!
Okay, so the PS2, the worst performer by a mile in our last little Max Payne port competition, and I'm not going to keep you guys in suspense, nothing has changed. In terms of specs, we're looking at an interlaced output, so 480i only, a similar 60 FPS frame rate target, and your choice between standard or widescreen. Unlike the Xbox port, the PS2 utilizes anamorphic widescreen, which means the console actually squishes the picture horizontally so that your TV or your scaler can stretch it without a lot of distortion. On the plus side, that means we don't get the weird pinched comic panel cutscenes that the Xbox port suffered from, but to balance that plus, we have some absolutely mangled text. And while editing this video, I also noticed that it zooms the camera in just about as much as the Xbox. So needless to say, I went with 4x3 to get my footage, although it's not like that helped things very much. I hope you guys will excuse me if I use some complex descriptive language here, but this port looks fucking gnarly.
You alright?
It's got an absolutely wild amount of aliasing, which, to be fair, I could let slide if it was the only problem. Contrasting those razor-sharp stair-stepped edges are some of the blurriest, low-resolution textures I've ever seen on the console. I mean, truly, it's enough of an issue that I would say it fundamentally affects the game's playability. Like, there's no way a person could enjoy any of Max Payne 2's cutscenes while they've got this space alien looking into their soul. I mean, when you put this version up against its competition on the Xbox, it kind of gives the impression we're looking at a generational difference in hardware. And yes, the PS2 is a less powerful machine, but it can pull off far more impressive visuals than this. With the side-by-side treatment though, you probably noticed that the image here, for some reason, takes on a very noticeable color shift towards cyan. Literally nothing gets away untouched by this weird-ass color space issue, leading to an effect I would describe as the game somehow getting left in your pocket and going through the wash. Almost everywhere you look, there's missing color information where gradients have been crushed into this single bluish-green shade, and it's honestly kind of hard to look at. Here at the start of the game, the blood on Max's face is so distorted that it's black instead of red, which, to be fair, is a little more realistic, but there will be no points awarded for accidental realism. But hey, at least while you're playing your copy of Max Payne that somebody spilled green paint on, you also get the benefit of a frame rate that could be beaten by a flip book. All jokes aside though, I would say this port is genuinely unplayable. The dropped frames make it annoyingly hard to shoot accurately, and to add insult to injury, not even the cutscenes can get their act together. At no point while playing this thing did I ever feel like I was getting used to the nasty frame rate. At the end of each level it felt like I had just barely made it through, more thanks to luck than my inputs. And of course my reward for that was getting to sit through some atrociously long load times. To put it lightly, this was not a fun experience for me. Max Payne 2 on the PS2 is damn near an abomination, and at no point should anyone consider it as a serious option for playing the game. Trust me, I would love to tell you that the only bad way to play Max Payne 2 is not to play it, but if this is somehow your only option, I don't know, you might be better off going without.
Bullshit!
Jumping straight from the frying pan and into the fire, we have the Xbox 360 port, which is less of an official port and more of a poorly implemented value add in the form of some incredibly sloppy early Microsoft emulation. This version of the game runs at the original's native resolution of 480p, but will be internally upscaled to whatever you have your console set to output. In a semi-understandable move, at least for the day, it defaults to the Xbox port's widescreen mode, but there's no option to disable it. So that means you're stuck with the cropped edges and squished graphic novel panels we looked at before. On the visual front, I'd say we're dealing with a, perfectly acceptable enough result. The softer analog output of the original Xbox made for some relatively smooth edges, but the uneven scaling being performed here causes some very harsh aliasing and shimmer. To me, it looks really bad, but I would imagine your average person just trying to play Max Payne 2 might not mind it too much. On the plus side though, the OG Xbox port of the game was sporting some really high-res textures for a console title, so the upscale here doesn't make any of them stand out as not matching the sharpened edges of the 3D models. If this video was being produced back in 2007, I would include ease of use as a big point in its favor. I mean, you really can't beat the idea of being able to just put your Max Payne 2 DVD into your 360, download a quick update, and be on your way. Of course, nowadays you'll either need a hard drive that already had that update installed or a modded console to get the same functionality, and if you are thinking about taking advantage of one of those avenues to play some Max Payne 2 on a 360, let me go ahead and take this opportunity to strongly suggest that you don't. Because the performance here on Microsoft's first HD console is just unbearably bad, at points dipping far below the already terrible frame rate of the PS2 port. I was able to stomach enough of the game to get to the attack on Max's apartment, but at the end of that section, the fight with the cleaners on the ground level got dangerously close to the single digits, which is when I decided it wasn't worth putting any more effort in. It's not like anybody outside of the criminally insane are out there seriously considering the Xbox 360 as an option to play Max Payne 2, which I think shows off the honest purpose of these port sections. See, the hours of story, gameplay, and graphical analysis, that's all for you guys. But this section here, this is 100% me. And you know, sometimes I get a wild inkling to see how a game performs on some obscure-ass platform or while using a method that no one would actually consider. And I'm not saying that these long-as-hell videos are some kind of public excuse to indulge in that curiosity, but let's move on.
Get out! Get out! No one's driving me out of my...
Okay, just like before, we are checking out an emulated version of Max Payne 2 here, this time on the Series X. And while it would be obvious to pin the much better result on the orders of magnitude stronger hardware it's running on, I think the best contributor here is the fact that these new consoles are essentially using PC architecture. So writing custom emulators that have open access to every bit of the console's resources is a much easier job. Unlike the last version we talked about, this bespoke port of Max Payne 2 goes well beyond just displaying the assets housed on the disc and prescales 3D geometry, which in the most simplistic terms just means way smoother lines with less aliasing. Zooming in for a really close look at the resulting image, I don't think the console is outputting a native 4K picture, but probably something closer to an internal 1080 or even 1440p. Regardless, that resolution is being upscaled before it leaves the console, so your TV is going to be getting a 4K signal, and if you're a little more than a foot away from it, you'll probably never see any evidence of it being anything else. Sadly, we are once again left with the Xbox's widescreen output with no option to change it to 4:3, so you'll have the skinny looking comic panels and HUD elements sitting right in the center of the screen instead of near its edges. Following that with an upside though, this version of the game runs at a buttery smooth frame rate. It's not quite a locked 60, but close enough you could be forgiven for thinking it was. The original Xbox version's average FPS was enough for me to consider it almost perfect, and this port is even more consistent. So I think most people will be able to get through the entire game without ever noticing any dips outside of very rare occasions. And once again, because the textures in that original Xbox release were so damn crispy, the higher resolution output doesn't really highlight any flaws. In fact, I'm pretty confident a person who hasn't played the PC original in a while would stand a good chance of thinking that's what they were looking at if you showed them a few scenes from this port. If we're talking negatives, there is one single issue here, but in fairness, it is something that exists across all of the Xbox versions we've looked at. I'm only bringing it up now because the higher fidelity and clarity makes it much more noticeable. When you kill a bad guy and the ragdoll physics kick in, for some reason, it takes their heads a long time to catch up to their bodies, so you end up with quite a few frames of this brontosaurus neck thing going on. Obviously, this is not the kind of problem that would ever get in the way of you enjoying the game on really any of these platforms, but it was way too funny to not at least point out. Rolling all of these ports out for some sort of a ranking, I would say if you aren't willing or able to play the game on PC, the Series X is your absolute best option. Outside of a few minor-ish artifacts caused by the forced widescreen, this is an incredible way to experience Max's adventures in Depression Land. If you're a retro head though, the original Xbox port is simply amazing given the restrictions of the hardware. It's got all the same great gameplay and maybe 98% of the performance that you would find in the modern version. And on top of that, there's something just undeniably attractive about looking at 480p when you have it running through the right scaler. The Xbox 360 and PS2 ports of the game are so bad that I've convinced myself they don't actually exist and thus will not be mentioned from here on out. So with two and only two options available, it's really nice that both are pretty amazing.
You are insane, psychotic. You have to eat plenty of pills to get better.
So far I've been fairly analytical with this video. pointing out the way that Max Payne 2's gameplay, story, and presentation work, and inserting small bits of what little expertise I could be said to have in between. But if it's cool with you guys, I'd like to get a touch more serious here at the end. See, there's a reason I wanted to cover the Max Payne series on my channel again, and it's not just that I've grown as a content creator since my first attempt. More than anything, it was to work my way up to this point, this moment right here. Because while I do hold a lot of gaming memories dear, my time with Max Payne 2 is disproportionately special to me. It sits in a very deep, nearly unreachable part of my mind. So if you're looking for some kind of objective score here at the end, you're not going to find it. This video may have come across as a review of a piece of media. Hell, I may have sold it as one at the start, but make no mistake, it's a celebration. Let's call it a long list of reasons why I absolutely love Max Payne 2. Are there better uses of narrative language, pacing, game mechanics, music, or character writing out there? Yeah, no doubt, but never in my life have I come across a work of fiction that I felt such a deep appreciation for. As a person who makes a living critiquing things here on the internet, you would think I would have built up a sizable vocabulary to express things like this, but there are times when a game's effect on me reaches far beyond my ability to describe it. And this is one of those times. I can't verbally transport you into my bedroom in South Florida, speak words that will manifest the glow of the ViewSonic CRT as its image bounces around the room and dissipates into the dark. I can't make you hear Sam Lake's words coming out of James McCaffrey's mouth in the exact way those tones exited the 5.1 Dell speaker system my dad bought for the family computer that eventually ended up on mine. There are no words that I could come up with that would ever make you feel the mushy, rubber membrane, no-name keyboard that came with my pre-built computer. But I think if you search your memories, you can probably find a similar experience of yours. A moment that you can easily transport yourself back to with just the right mix of stimuli. That perfect combination of sensory input that, in its emotional strength and value, burnt itself a lasting image onto the biological makeup of your brain. Something so real to you that it almost exists in a genuine physical space. My hope is that the culmination of this video's content has helped you in some way to find that place. Because after hours and hours of hard, deep thinking, this is the only way I can properly describe Max Payne 2. As something so personal, I may as well be the only human on Earth to have ever experienced it. Something perfect, not in a general sense, not in comparison to some other fictional work, but to me. It almost feels like Max Payne exists within me, not in the sense that I resemble any attributes of his, but his personality was just so strong that it embedded itself here. In that way, his crushing defeats and costly victories, they're also mine. What I'm trying to get across is that Max Payne 2 as a story, as a game, as an interactive experience, it's a part of me. I keep it right here inside. So thank you for allowing me to get that out, and hopefully I see all you guys next time. If this is your first time, usually I like to use this end section here to respond to questions from my supporters as a way of saying thanks for their generosity, but I decided to open up the floor to anyone this time. So let's find out if I end up regretting that.
Has anyone ever compared you to Clark from The Thing? Sure, you both have killer beards, but I feel like you have the same energy, tone of voice, etc. If I can be cheeky and get another quick one in. Favorite tattoo or yours, and why? I've almost got 2 full sleeves now, but I am not manly enough for neck tattoos. Just yet.
I don't think anybody has ever compared me to Clark from The Thing, but dude's a dog lover, so I'm on board with that. That's fine with me. You know, I'm sitting here thinking, and I like a lot of my tattoos. I think the lettering on my neck came out so great. My artist recommended that we go bigger with it, and I have never in my life been happier that I went with the artist's opinion on a tattoo. Outside of that, on my left forearm, I have the cyborg girl from Robot Carnival who was given sentience. There's something about her character that always really resonated with me, and I enjoyed her design, so I went to a fine line artist from Australia, and she did a bang-up job. Usually fine line stuff doesn't age too well, but I've had this for about 4 years, and it only looks better with age, so I'm happy about that.
What two genres of games do you feel don't get combined enough?
Ooh, that's an easy one. Survival horror and turn-based role-playing. You really don't see enough games trying to smash those two genres together, and when you do, oftentimes one half of that combination sort of gets left by the wayside for the other. Although I will admit there are a couple of titles that I think fall straight down the middle, and they are very, very cool. They will be in an upcoming modern Resident Evil clone video, don't you worry.
You live in Japan, right? What got you to move there?
Yeah, that's correct. I live in Tokyo, Japan, and it is honestly kind of amazing. I guess in terms of what allowed me to move here is the fact that YouTube is my full-time job and I can basically do that from anywhere in the world. But what inspired me to move here is, I don't know, there's a lot of reasons. I have really always enjoyed Japanese media, of course, video games, anime, dramas, live-action movies. But on top of that, I started getting comfortable speaking Japanese, and then me and my wife actually vacationed here for a couple of weeks for our honeymoon. And I think it's really hard to spend time here without wanting to pick up and move. I guess I'm just lucky enough that I was in a position to where I could do that.
How did you get so hot? I recently started going to the gym to put on some muscle, and I'd love any recommendations you have to diet or movements to try.
I swear I'm not trying to be fake humble here, but I can promise you my build could be better described as looks good with a shirt on, not with a shirt off. But if you are looking to build very, very big, very dense muscle mass, I would say look into a program called Blood and Guts by Dorian Yates, possibly the greatest bodybuilder who has ever lived. The basic idea is lifting incredibly heavy weight for very few reps, and I can say that when I first started lifting, that got me huge very fast. The only downside I would say is that it sort of necessitates having a lifting partner because you're going to have to reach your failure point and somebody's going to have to spot you for a couple of reps past that. And just like any other lifting program, do it for maybe 4 months, figure out which lifts really speak to you and get results, and try to swap out ones that don't for stuff that you've already had success with, and you'll have yourself a perfect personalized little routine.
Have you ever played Darkness 1 and 2, and would you ever do a retrospective on them? I love those games personally.
Yes and yes. I absolutely adored the first Darkness game. The second one was very fun, but wasn't quite so emotionally impactful, but I will 100% be covering those games at some point. Especially now that PS3 and Xbox 360 emulation has reached some kind of point of viability, it would be amazing to revisit that first game and try to use maybe like a keyboard mouse setup. But either way, yeah, 100% going to be covering them.
How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
I mean, to really answer that question, I would have to disintegrate in front of you.
What metal bands are you currently listening to? Do you like atmospheric black metal?
Okay, here we go. This is the good stuff. All right, so for the last, I want to say 3 years, I've just been on a heavy slam kick. So a lot of Corpse Pile, Snuffed on Sight, Peeling Flesh, Corpse with a K, Analepsy, really good stuff like that. Within the last month or so, I've found 2 bands that are kind of similar. They're both a sort of combination of nu metal and quasi-experimental gent. It's very weird. Brutality and Brace. Both very, very cool bands, very interesting sound. I've also found myself in a bit of a girl punk and alternative rock kind of mode, so a lot of Lunachicks, The Distillers, Emil and the Sniffers, and Babes in Toyland. As far as atmospheric black metal goes, I don't know that I'm aware of that genre. I can say that in the black metal realm, I tend to skew more towards the really, really fast side of things, so stuff like Watain or Dark Funeral, but I'd be open to listen to it, sure.
I want to know more about the skate scene over there, from your perspective, Ofk. Is it easy to find parks to skate at? Do people street skate, or prefer dry spots more? I loved skating in Florida and would love to know what you think the difference is.
You know, I'll level with you. I'm not really plugged into the skate scene here, not as much as I would like to be, at least. But coming from the perspective of somebody who skates here in Tokyo specifically, there aren't a lot of DIY spots. You're going to have to find a skate park, and they aren't incredibly numerous. There's not a lot of them. From what I hear though, Yokohama has more skate parks than the entire island of Japan, so you would definitely want to check out Yokohama first. But for the most part here in Tokyo, man, you're getting kicked out of every spot you find unless it's the luckiest day of the week. On the plus side, the cops here are incredibly nice and they're not going to be an asshole to you if you're just skating out in public, but you'll get a lot of noise complaints. You'll have security guards kick you out of stair sets. It's not ideal, to say the least. On top of that, not to sound like a negative Nancy, but a lot of the roads here in Tokyo are very patchwork. Like, even if you do find a smooth strip of road, it's not going to be too long until some new apartment complex or house gets built and they need to tear up that concrete and patch it back in to put some sewage system in or something. Going from ward to ward, it's like skating on a trillion different types of concrete. So I would say if you're street skating to get around, build yourself out a board that's kitted for the roughest terrain. Big ol' soft wheels, maybe a fishtail, the works. If you do plan on hitting spots though, from what I've seen, the best time to do that is after midnight. Basically when everybody's either drunk or the cops aren't paying attention anymore, you can find a lot of really cool spots. The kick-out factor is still pretty high, but it's lower than during the daytime. Honestly, I could go on and on about this subject, but we'll go ahead and cut it there.
Is there any audio or video you could share when you were in a band? Very interesting for sure.
Oh yeah, I could definitely do that. For those of you who are not in the know, I used to front a death metal band called King Conquer, and we had a lot of fun. Did a lot of tours, sold a lot of records. It was dope. I guess here is a little section of a song that I absolutely love, but we never actually released it or even mastered it, so it's in a really rough state, but man, I really, really like this song. Here's a few seconds. I'll put a link to the full version maybe in a pinned comment or in the description if you want to listen to the whole thing. I think you should though. It's a really cool song. It's a headbanger for sure.
How long until the nukes fly?
Not soon enough.
Hi there, have you played and or seen Iron Lung? If so, what did you think about it?
To me, Iron Lung is a part of what I like to call high concept gaming, which are titles where the idea behind them is a little more interesting than the act of playing them, which is fine. That's not an insult. I mean, it's really interesting stuff, but honestly, I would rather just watch a video essay about the game than I would play through it. But I hear the movie's pretty good, and honestly, I'd love to watch it one of these days when I get a chance.
What is your favorite video game shotgun?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I definitely have to go with the pump action in Duke Nukem Time to Kill, and for sure the custom shotgun in Resident Evil 2. You cannot beat something so powerful it pushes you back like 6 feet every time you fire it.
Was it logistically, visas etc., difficult to move to Japan, and what was the main catalyst to make the decision?
100%. It was incredibly difficult to move to Japan. Getting your visa is a process of just endless paperwork and getting records you never knew you had. I mean, imagine right now you had to figure out what elementary school you went to and find proof that you went to it. It's that tough. I won't lie though, my wife took care of a lot of that because she is so much better of a detail-oriented person when it comes to that kind of stuff, so I was very lucky on that front. You also have to figure out a way to sell almost everything you own or find a way to store it long term. There's a lot that goes into it, but coming from somebody who's been here for years, it is worth it. This is an incredible country. The food's amazing, the people are nice, and the language is incredibly fascinating to learn.
To my actual question, you're known to occasionally have contrary opinions to popular opinion or games media. While I'd say that's probably a good thing, it got me thinking of this one. What would you say is the biggest game everyone seemed to like that you did not? And conversely, what is one game that everyone seemed to hate that you loved?
You know, I think that might be the best middle ground I've ever heard of. If we can agree on RE4 and disagree about RE7, hey, that's heaven to me. To the actual question though, I would say Gears of War is a pretty good example of a game everybody seemed to love, but I kind of hated. I mean, the story was cool, but the gameplay is just ass. And you know, a second one, now that I'm thinking about it, that Balatro game that came out, like, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but like, you guys are aware that Twitter psyoped you into thinking digital poker was the game of the year, right? Truly, 2024 was just a shared psychotic episode that we were all taking part in. As far as games that I love and everybody hates goes, you really don't have to search too far for that. Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus, Resident Evil Dead Aim. Hell, I really like Gun Survivor, honestly. I think that's a really underrated video game.
How do you motivate yourself even in the midst of adversity? What inspires you in those moments to find motivation? I have watched you lots in recent years, and the nostalgic core memes you helped me experience again, I'll always be appreciative for.
Okay, so this is gonna sound kind of stupid, but I don't necessarily believe in motivation. In my mind, how I see it is I have made a decision to do something, and it's a binary state of me either doing or not doing that thing. And the concepts of easy or hard, they don't really matter. It's kind of like when you're lifting weights. The bar you have on top of your chest at the moment might be way too heavy for you to lift, but you are either attempting to lift that bar or you're not. It really doesn't matter how heavy it is. It's just whether or not you're doing it. Now, I'm fully aware that's kind of a psychotic mindset to have, but I feel like an average person could take some portion of that approach and probably apply it to their life and maybe find some success with it. All right, guys, I think that's about it for today, but thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.